The first thing they handed me at the Taiqing sect wasn't a sword. It was a hoe. A wooden one, with a crack down the handle. The kind of tool you give to the one person nobody expects to survive the year. I stood there in the herb garden holding it, sweating through a gray linen robe 2 sizes too big, while a senior disciple named Feng Chao read my file out loud to 4 brand new recruits like he was announcing the weather. Ren Ye, servant of the Meng family. No spiritual root worth mentioning. Assigned to the herb garden. He didn't even look up. He said servant, the way you'd say stain. The other 3 new kids got the memo instantly. There was Chen Shu, a young master with a jaw so sharp you could open letters with it, already sizing everyone up like he was shopping. There was Jiang Li, a rich girl in silk that probably cost more than the entire garden, wrinkling her nose at the smell of dirt. And there was Bai Fan, tall, quiet, standing a little apart with the specific stillness of someone who has learned that the less he says, the safer he is. 3 of them had talent. One of them was me. Guess which one got the cracked hoe? Here's the part they didn't know. I wasn't from here, not from the Meng family, not from this sect, not even from this world. I woke up in this body about 7 years ago, 10 years old, half-starved, lying in a ditch outside the Meng estate with somebody else's memories rattling around my skull. The real Renye had been a page boy, worked to the bone, and he'd finally just given out. And me, whoever I used to be, I inherited the empty seat. Congratulations to me. My first meal in this glorious cultivation paradise was a bun somebody threw at a dog. I almost died again that first month. Would have, actually, except the Meng family's 3rd miss found me collapsed by the well and told the physician to heal the servant boy. Nobody heals a servant boy. She did. And on the table, somewhere in the fever, my heart stopped for 1 full minute before it started again. That minute is the reason for everything that comes next. Because when I opened my eyes, there was a line of glowing text hanging in the air that only I could see. Lifespan plundered. Plus 1 year. I want to be very clear about how insane that is. In this world, people spend their whole lives clawing after a longer life. They swallow pills, they rob tombs, they murder each other over a single lotus that might buy them a decade. And me, the trash servant with no talent, I had a little voice in my head that said, kill anything with spiritual energy in it. A flower, a bug, a beast, a person, and I keep its years. All of them. Add them to my own tank. And the years aren't just for living longer. That's the second thing that took me a while to understand, sitting in that ditch running the numbers. I could spend them. Pour 100 years into my cultivation, and my body would jump like I'd trained for a century overnight. Pour them into my talent, my spiritual root, the thing the whole sect measured me by and found worthless, and I could drag it up a grade. Pour them into a technique, and it would evolve in my hands into something the manual never described. Lifespan wasn't just my health bar, it was money. And I had just been assigned, personally, by the universe, to a garden. A garden. Full of spirit plants. That the sect grows on purpose, and waters, and protects. I looked down at my cracked hoe, and I swear I had to physically stop myself from grinning like an idiot in front of everybody. So there's Feng Chao, still droning through the rules. Don't cultivate without permission, don't leave the mountain, don't touch the 7th tier medicine, or you'll be expelled, or worse. The 3 talented kids are half listening because they already know they're going to test into a real hall in a year and leave this dump behind. And I'm nodding along, very humble, very stupid, thinking about the Qingxin flower blooming 6 feet to my left. The moment Feng Chao wandered off, I knelt down like a good little gardener, pretended to check the soil, and pinched the flower off at the stem. Ding, lifespan plundered. Plus 1 year, 1 flower, 1 year of somebody's life, just handed to me for the crime of doing my chores. I sat there in the dirt trying to keep a straight face while doing math that would make an accountant weep. There were hundreds of these, thousands, once you counted the fields, the beds, the greenhouse, the whole sprawling operation, every plant a coin. And I was the only one on the entire mountain who knew the bank was open. Now, being smart and being safe are 2 different skills, and I'd like to say I understood that from day 1. I did not. My first genius plan was to just harvest everything immediately and get rich. Except a garden that suddenly goes bald overnight, gets one specific person in a lot of trouble, and that person waters it. So I did the boring thing instead. I went to Feng Chao, the senior disciple who wanted nothing more than to descend the mountain and go live a quiet life with the girl he liked. And I gave him a little carved trinket I'd whittled out of spirit wood, and I asked, very shyly, if maybe I could be the one who handled the harvesting. All of it. Since nobody else wanted to get their hands dirty anyway. He looked at me like I'd volunteered to clean the latrines for free. You want to do the picking? All of it? I like plants, I said. I have never told a truer lie in my life. And that's how I, Ren Ye, rank absolute 0, got a monopoly on every blade of spirit grass in the Taiqing sect's outer herb garden, with the full blessing of management. I didn't win a fight. I didn't awaken a bloodline. I just noticed the toilet job was actually a gold mine, and asked, politely, if I could scrub the toilet forever. Then I went back to my leaky shack, sat on a bed with more holes in it than my future prospects, cracked open the chi refining sutra they'd tossed me, and tried to actually cultivate the normal way, like a normal person. It was a disaster. My spiritual root was so bad that a full hour of meditation got me roughly the amount of energy a healthy man gets from a nap. The system was a cheat code, sure, but the body I was renting had the natural talent of a wet paper bag. Fine, that's what the years were for. I just had to be patient, keep my head down, and not let a single soul on this mountain figure out that the sect's most useless servant was quietly becoming the richest man alive. Easy. What could possibly go wrong in a place full of ambitious teenagers and monsters? A year went by like that. I picked, I plundered, I hoarded. Every morning I'd walk the beds, and every evening my tank ticked up, quiet and steady. Meanwhile, the three talented kids did exactly what talented kids do. Chen Shu swaggered his way to the 4th level of chi refining, and made sure everyone knew it. Jiang Li wasn't far behind. And Baifan, quiet Baifan, had already passed them both while barely seeming to try, which was the first thing about him that made me look twice, because by then I'd hit 500 years of banked lifespan, and the system had unlocked a new toy, life source detection. Suddenly, when I looked at a person, I could read 3 numbers floating over their head: their age, their current lifespan, and the ceiling, the maximum they could ever reach. Which is a very polite way of saying I could see exactly how much potential everyone around me was hiding. Most people read like what they were: Chen Shu, arrogant, ordinary ceiling; Jiang Li, silk and no substance. And then I looked at Bai Fan, the quiet gardener kid in the patched robe, and his numbers came up 243, current, over a ceiling of 1680. 1680. That's not a servant's ceiling. That's not even a normal genius's ceiling. That's the kind of number that comes with a hidden last name and people hunting for you. This kid, weeding radishes next to me in a garden for rejects, was sitting on the potential of somebody the whole world would eventually be very interested in, and he was hiding it on purpose, in the toilet job. Same as me, I did not say a single word about it. When you meet another person pretending to be nothing, the polite thing to do is pretend right back. That was also around when the old gardener came home. Elder Hua Rui, the woman who technically ran the place, a hunched, sharp-eyed old lady who'd been away on some errand nobody explained. She came back looking older than when she left. I scanned her out of pure reflex, and her numbers made me wince. 106 years old, 120 of lifespan against a ceiling of 170. 14 years left in the tank, and a hard wall not far past that. She was dying, slowly, and she knew it, and she'd come back to the garden to do it, where nobody important would notice. She gathered the 4 of us, and like a proper master, handed out cultivation techniques. Chen Shu grabbed the flashiest one. Jiang Li took what looked expensive. And then it was Bai Fan's turn, and here's the thing that told me the old lady saw more than she let on. She offered him a whole spread, and he reached past all the strong, obvious choices, and picked the Chi Si Sutra, a slow, defensive, deeply unglamorous method that no ambitious genius would ever touch. He picked it precisely because a genius wouldn't, because a genius would draw eyes, and Hua Rui watched him do it, and said nothing, and I watched her watch him, and thought, everyone in this garden is holding a card face down. Fantastic. Very relaxing place to retire. I told myself it didn't matter. Let the royal-looking kid hide his royal-looking secret. Let the old lady take hers to the grave. I had a garden, a cheat, and one simple, beautiful goal in life. Get strong enough that nobody could ever touch me. Get rich enough in years that I'd basically live forever, and otherwise be left completely, gloriously alone. The universe heard that goal, and the universe, as always, said, lol. Let me tell you how I spent my 2nd year, because it's important for understanding just how deep in over my head I was about to be. I got greedy. Not with the harvesting, I was careful with that. I got greedy with my own body. I'd been sitting on this pile of years like a dragon on gold, and one night I finally did the thing I'd been too scared to try. I took 10 years and dumped them straight into a vitality technique I'd scraped together, just to see what would happen. And the system did something I did not expect. It didn't just level the technique up, it evolved it. Chained it into something better, then something better than that, until the thing sitting in my chest was called the Overlord Body Scripture, and my flesh and bone had quietly become tougher than a lot of people 3 whole realms above me. I stood in my shack that night, flexed my hand, and watched my knuckles not break when I punched the stone wall. A servant with the body of a small siege weapon. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. I also, immediately, told absolutely no one, because a chi-refining nobody who can dent granite is exactly the kind of miracle that gets a person dissected in a nice quiet room. And that instinct, keep it hidden, keep it buried, was about to save my life, because the garden was not as sleepy as it looked. I started catching pieces of it, Hua Rui muttering to herself at night. Whispers about outer disciples getting hurt in the dark. And then a name, passed around low and scared, the mountain demon. Some spirit beast with a human face and a monkey's body. Something that hated fire and loved blood. That had already clawed up 30-odd disciples and killed more than 10. And, according to the whispers, something with a very powerful somebody standing behind it, keeping it fed. Which meant it wasn't a wild animal, it was a pet. Somebody's pet, hunting on our mountain. Right around then 2 things landed in my lap. The first was a bird. I caught a little spirit sparrow raiding the beds, a scrawny, glittering, thieving thing with a talent for sniffing out treasure, and instead of eating it for the years I decided to keep it. I named it Dragon Sparrow, which was ambitious, given that it was mostly beak and bad attitude. Within a week, it had established the 2 great pillars of our relationship, which were 1. Leading me to buried valuables, and 2. Relieving itself directly onto my head at the worst possible moments. Best decision I ever made. The second thing that landed in my lap was a bodyguard. The sect sent down an inner sect disciple named Wen Tao to watch the garden, a real one, 19, 4th level of foundation establishment, a genuine young genius. He looked at the 4 of us weeds with the polite contempt of a man who expects to be somewhere better very soon. Note that. It matters in about a page. Because the mountain demon came for us on a night with no moon. I remember the sound first. Hua Rui and Feng Chao were gone in a heartbeat, the 2 people supposedly in charge, sprinting for the tree line the second things got real, and honestly, good instinct, terrible leadership. Chen Shu went out swinging and got swatted down. Wen Tao, the genius, lasted longer, long enough to matter, and then he went down too, hard. And Baifan, quiet Baifan with the royal ceiling, took a hit that opened him from shoulder to hip and came crawling to the one door still shut. Mine. I dragged him inside. I want that on the record, because it's the first genuinely decent thing I did in this world that wasn't also, secretly, an investment. I dragged the bleeding kid in and barred the door. And then the door stopped being a door, because the mountain demon smelled his blood and came through my wall like the wall was a suggestion. Here's where the plan was supposed to be fire. It hates fire, everyone said so. I had a torch. I shoved it at the monster's face with the confidence of a man holding a winning hand. And the mountain demon, in a display of complete disrespect, splashed water on it. Put my whole strategy out with a flick of its wrist. The torch hissed and died and I was standing in the dark, in a wrecked shack, next to a passed-out royal, facing a killer that had already gone through better men than me tonight. So I did the only thing left. I panicked. And I punched it. I want to stress that I had no plan for this. I threw a scared, ugly, closing my eyes at the end kind of punch, and the overlord body I'd been hiding for a year met a monster in the dark, and the monster came apart. Ding. Lifespan plundered. Plus 52 years. Mountain demon. Tier 2. Silence. Just me, breathing. In a ruined room, with 52 fresh years in the bank and a corpse that shouldn't exist. Killed by a servant who shouldn't be able to. And in that silence the fear caught up to me, because I understood exactly what I was holding. If anyone learned that Ren Ye, Chi refining nobody, had one-shot a tier 2 spirit demon, I would not be a hero. I would be a specimen. Somebody's very interesting new project. So I made a decision that tells you everything about the kind of protagonist I am. I did not stand over the body and monologue. I demolished the rest of my own house to hide the shape of the fight. Picked myself up, flew myself, badly, into the wall of Hua Rui's hut, coughed up a mouthful of blood for authenticity, and fainted. On purpose. A perfect, cowardly, load-bearing feint. When the dust settled, this is what everyone found. Chen Shu, dead, gone. A talented boy who charged the monster head-on and never got up. Bai Fan, alive but carved up. A scar he'd carry across his whole body. Wen Tao, the genius bodyguard, crippled, bones shattered. His bright future turned off like a lamp. The demon's corpse, conveniently vanished, hauled off in the night by whoever it belonged to. Which told me the pet had an owner and the owner had been watching. And Ren Ye, the useless servant, found half dead in the old lady's hut, clearly having flown into a wall trying to escape, poor thing. Nobody looked at me twice. Why would they? The one whose skin healed overnight without a single scar left, under a robe nobody bothered to lift. I lay in that hut and I did not feel like a winner. I'd watched a kid I ate breakfast with die. I'd watched a genius get his legs taken. And I'd learned, the hard way, on the first real night of my new life, the rule I would build everything else on top of. The strength isn't the secret. Anyone can get strong. The secret is the secret. The moment the world knows what you can do is the moment the world decides what to do about it. So I would get stronger, yes, endlessly, quietly, and I would let every single person on this mountain go on believing I was exactly what my file said. A servant, with a hoe, who liked plants. Meanwhile, somewhere up the mountain, somebody was looking down at an empty patch of ground where their favorite monster used to be, wondering who could possibly have killed it. And starting, very slowly, to think about the garden. Half a year later, the old lady called me in and paid me off. Not in money, in a technique. She handed me a movement art called Divine Footsteps, a genuinely good one, way above a servant's pay grade, and she did it with a look that said, "We both know what this is." She'd figured out, or guessed, that the mountain demon's death and the useless gardener who'd conveniently fainted through the whole thing were not unrelated. She never said it out loud. She just gave me something valuable and watched my face while I decided whether to be surprised. I chose mildly grateful. It's my best expression. I've practiced. That same season the garden reshuffled. Feng Chao finally got his wish and descended the mountain to go be a normal happy person in the normal happy world. Which honestly, respect, that's the real cheat code nobody talks about. And with him gone, somebody had to be named the next pharmacist, the one who actually keeps the garden running. Hua Rui looked around at her remaining options. One dead, one crippled elsewhere, and one glorified rich girl, and landed on me, the servant. Congratulations, Ren Yi. You have been promoted from unpaid gardener to slightly less unpaid gardener. I accepted with the humble dignity of a man who had just been handed the keys to his own private bank and told to guard it. Then the Meng family came collecting, and I got to close the oldest debt on my books. A page boy named Zhou Qing came up the mountain with a flying sword and a shopping list. He was there to gather spirit medicine for the Meng family, for the third miss and the young master, the usual tribute a servant's old house expects. And normally that kind of order makes a gardener sweat, because it's your inventory walking out the door for free. But I want you to remember something. The third miss of the Meng family is the exact person who, 7 years ago, looked at a dying servant boy nobody would waste a copper on and said, "Heal him. I'm only alive to be annoyed by this bird on my head because of her." So when Zhou Qing held out his list, I didn't haggle, I didn't hide the good stuff. I filled it, all of it, the best I had, and I handed it over. Debt paid. I don't carry many. The ones I carry, I clear. It's the one thing about me that isn't a scam. Zhou Qing, for his part, turned out to be a decent kid, and before he left he did me a solid that mattered more than he knew. He passed me a body refining method the Meng family used, the basics of an indestructible dragon body, a Vajra body art. To him it was a small favor between servants. To me it was another coin to feed the machine, another technique to throw years at and watch evolve. I thanked him like it was nothing. Inside, the accountant did a little dance. By this point I'm 18, and my tank has quietly rolled past 2,600 years, and I still can't cultivate my way out of a wet bag the normal way. So one night I ran the experiment I'd been circling. I took 500 years and poured them straight into my spiritual root, the raw talent, the thing everyone measured me by, and the result taught me a lesson I'm glad I learned in private. It barely moved. 500 years of banked lifespan for a sliver of improvement. Turns out shoving years directly into raw talent is the single most wasteful thing you can do with them. It's like heating your house by burning gold bars. The efficient path, the system was quietly screaming at me, wasn't the root. It was the techniques. Feed the years into a method, and it doesn't just grow, it transforms, and each transformation drags everything else up with it for a fraction of the cost. Good to know. Expensive lesson, filed away. Around then, Bai Fan came to say goodbye. He was leaving the garden to go settle some grudges of his own, off to wherever quiet royal-blooded kids go when the world starts pulling on them. And before he left, he pressed a sword manual into my hands. A partial one, the outer layers of something called 9 Profound Qi. A parting gift from one guy pretending to be nothing to another. I took it, and I meant it when I told him to come back in one piece. And I did not tell him that his little goodbye present was about to make me a swordsman in secret. Some things you don't say out loud. New faces filled the empty beds. A rowdy kid named Wang Kang, who couldn't sit still if you nailed him down, and a sharp-eyed girl named Su Jia, who took one look at me and, for reasons that would become a lifelong problem, decided I was interesting. The sect also handed me a fresh chore, cleaning the outer training grounds, which came with a trickle of lifespan and spirit stones and the occasional stray medicine, and which I accepted with my patented enthusiasm for menial labor. And in whatever time was left, before he vanished down the mountain, Feng Chao taught me to fly a sword. I have to be honest about this part because it's the truest thing in the whole story. I loved it. Everything else, the hiding, the scheming, the accounting, that's survival. But the first time I stood on a length of steel and lifted off the ground with the wind screaming past me, some idiot part of me that had been dead since I woke up in that ditch came roaring back to life. I quoted sword immortal poetry to an empty sky like a lunatic, riding the wind on a sliver of steel, 10,000 miles in a breath. For one afternoon I wasn't a servant, or a schemer, or a walking bank. I was just a person who got to fly. Then Feng Chao descended the mountain for good, and I put the poetry away and went back to being nobody. Now, remember Bai Fan's manual. I read it cover to cover, and then I did the thing I do. I took 1,000 years and fed it in, and the chi refining junk I'd been failing at for years didn't level up, it evolved, into a 10,000 spirits wood origin scripture, and my worthless wood attribute root jumped a whole grade to profound in the process. Then I took another 1,000 and poured it into Bai Fan's 9 profound chi, and that transformed too, into a 9 profound illusionary method, a sword art that let me control blades with my mind. and dragged my metal attribute talent up to profound right alongside it. My eyes started shooting threads of spiritual energy when I focused. 2 grand for 2 evolutions and 2 talent upgrades. Compare that to 500 years for 1 pathetic nudge to my raw root, and you understand why I was practically giddy. The cheat wasn't the years. The cheat was knowing exactly where to spend them. Everyone else in this world was trying to get rich. I was the only one who'd read the fine print. I checked my tank after all that shopping. 1,460 years left, down from the spending, but every copper of it turned into permanent muscle. And the best part, the part that let me sleep at night, was that not one single person on the mountain had the faintest idea. As far as Taiqing knew, Ren Ye was still exactly what the file said. A chi refining gardener with a bird on his head and a talent for dirt. Which was a lovely thing to believe. Right up until the crippled genius came back to ask me some very pointed questions about the night the mountain demon died. He came masked, and his voice had gone hoarse and low, but I knew Wen Tao the second he limped through the garden gate. The bright young genius the demon had turned off like a lamp. He didn't waste time. He wanted to talk about that night, the night the monster died, and he watched my face the whole time he asked, looking for the crack. So I gave him nothing. I gave him the wide, dumb, terrified eyes of a servant who'd flown into a wall and missed everything. I was in a corner, sir. I fainted, sir. It was very dark and I am very useless, sir. And it worked, because it was the most believable thing in the world. Nobody suspects the paper bag. He backed off, and here's the part that made me almost feel bad for the guy. Instead of threatening me, he gave me a jade talisman to reach him, and promised me a reward if I ever remembered anything. A crippled man building himself a little network of informants, one useless gardener at a time, still trying to claw his way back to the man he was supposed to be. I took the talisman. I filed him away. He was going to be useful, just not the way he thought. Because I had a problem, and Wen Tao was about to become the solution. The mountain demon was back. I found out the way I find out everything, by being the invisible man in the corner. I went, masked and in black, to finish the monster for good, and at the old training ground I scanned the new outer sect guard posted there and nearly swallowed my own tongue. Behind a perfectly ordinary human face, the numbers read, Mountain Demon, Tier 3. 36 over 286 over 569. Somebody's patron had scraped it back together, upgraded it, and slotted it into the sect wearing a person's skin. It even tried to bait me, all friendly, offering free spirit medicine to the black mask stranger. Come closer, let me get a good look at you. I did not go closer. I have never gone closer in my life. I got out of there fast and quiet, and while I was leaving I overheard the thing report to its master through some bronze mirror ritual, and I learned 2 beautiful things. 1, its soul had come back incomplete, and 2, it had gotten the details of its own death wrong. It thought Jiang Li had killed it. Now, I could have corrected the record. I could have. But why would I do the sect's dangerous, high-profile monster slaying myself, in the open, when there was a crippled genius on this very mountain, who wanted nothing in the world more than revenge, and a jade talisman in my pocket with his name on it? So I did the laziest, most cowardly, most efficient thing available. I told Wen Tao where the demon was, and I let 2 people who both wanted it dead go handle it for me. Sick the wolf on the tiger and sell tickets. The night they fought, I heard it from across the mountain, the crack and roar of a real battle, Wen Tao and his backers against the resurrected thing. And through all of it Hua Rui, the dying old gardener, kept doing this unsettling thing, where she knew exactly how dangerous the night was going to be before it happened. She'd hold up 3 fingers when she looked at Jiang Li, like she was counting something down. I didn't understand it yet. I filed it. I file everything. The whole garden, remember, was a room full of people holding cards face down, and the old lady's hand was starting to show. Jiang Li, meanwhile, was falling apart. She'd been slipped a fast foundation technique, the kind that buys you a breakthrough now and charges your body ruinous interest later, and she was paying. She forced her way into foundation establishment, and I read her numbers as she did it. 21 over 21 over 162. Her lifespan and her current life had crashed into each other. That girl had less than a year left in the tank, and she'd bought it with her own future, and she had no idea. The silk and perfume rich girl who'd wrinkled her nose at me on day 1 was a dead woman walking, and the worst part was, she thought she was winning. I sent a junior named Xie Ming to escort her down to the outer sect, out of the way, somewhere she could quietly run out the clock without dying in my garden. Both of them left. Neither of them came back. And Hua Rui vanished for days, and when she reappeared she was wrecked. Cultivation collapsed all the way down to the 3rd level of chi refining. 2 years of life left where she'd had 14. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't explain, and I started doing the math nobody wanted me to do, connecting the missing girl and the missing junior and the broken old woman, and I did not like the answer forming. When she finally called me in, she said it plain, in the flat voice of a person who has stopped being able to afford lies. I turned them into zombies, and then she told me the whole thing, and the garden stopped being a garden, and became what it had always secretly been. Her senior brother, decades ago, the man she loved, had been a Purple Light Pavilion spy, a demonic path agent buried in the Taiqing sect. He died. And she inherited his post, his secret, the thing this garden was actually built to hide. She'd spent her whole life as a sleeper, guarding it, waiting to die quietly and pass it on. Jiang Li had stumbled onto something she shouldn't have, so Hua Rui killed her, and made a corpse general out of what was left. Her and poor grinning Xiaming both, fused into one thing to guard the secret below. That's what the three fingers had been, a countdown on a girl who was already dead and didn't know it. And then Hua Rui told me the part that rearranged my whole life. She hadn't just confessed to me, she'd enrolled me. She'd already told the other sleepers my name, marked me as the new agent, whether I wanted it or not, because she was out of time and I was the only successor left. Congratulations, Renye. You are now, on paper, a spy for the demonic path. No interview, no signing bonus, no way to quit. I want to tell you I handled this with cold, calculating grace. What actually happened is I threw myself into the role like a man who has decided that if he can't dodge the knife, he's going to catch it in his teeth and smile. I raised the invisible banner of the Purple Light Pavilion with the enthusiasm of somebody who had absolutely no intention of ever doing anything the Purple Light Pavilion wanted. Because here's the thing, and it's the whole thing. A secret demonic path post came with a job, and the job was to guard a hidden 7th-tier spirit medicine and a high-tier field, tucked away in a ley line formation under the garden. A 7th-tier spirit medicine. Do you understand what that is, to a man whose entire cheat is measured in years? The old lady thought she was handing me a burden and a leash. She was handing me the vault. Before she could hand me anything, though, the old lady had paperwork to do. A secret post is still a post, and a garden still has a boss on the books, so Hua Rui walked me down to the outer sect's executive hall to make it official. That's where I met a hall master named Xiao Jun, a decent, tired old bureaucrat, 384 over 561, a man with no great talent and no great cruelty, which in a cultivation sect makes you practically a saint. He stamped the token that made me the garden's official pharmacist. Renye, gardener, in ink. Remember Xiaojun, he gets one more scene, much later, and it's the kind that leaves a bruise. While I was down there, I was also allowed to pick a utility disciple of my own, a helper for the garden, and I had very specific requirements. I wanted someone with a long lifespan and low potential, and a reliable, uncomplicated disposition. Basically, I wanted a houseplant that could carry water. So I toured the miscellaneous affairs hall, reading numbers over heads like a man shopping for the least interesting person alive, and I found him. A bald kid gnawing a meat bun, cheerful, unremarkable, chi refining 3rd level. Except his life numbers were 362 over 413, which is absurd for a chi refining nobody, and I clocked it and thought, suspicious, and then I thought, don't care, and I recruited him anyway. Yan Hao, that was his name. Here is the joke that took me years to fully appreciate. Yan Hao was not a houseplant. Yan Hao was the runaway son of a Purple Light Pavilion demonic lord, infiltrating the Taiqing sect, hiding in the outer ranks exactly the way I was, wearing exactly the same dumb, harmless face. I picked him because I thought I was scamming a naive kid into free labor. He came with me because he thought he was scamming a naive gardener into cover. Two liars shook hands, each privately delighted at how badly he'd fooled the other, and neither of us was even a little bit right. It remains one of my favorite business decisions. The kids settled in about the way you'd expect a con man in a strange house to settle in. Wang Kong, the rowdy junior, bullied him in the sparring yard on principle, and I decided to teach a small lesson that also cemented my brand. I slipped Yan Hao a temporary boost pill and let him wipe the floor with Wang Kang, and then I stood there radiating quiet wisdom while everyone marveled at how the useless gardener had somehow made the weak kid win. Master Feng is so insightful. Master Feng sees potential in everyone. Master Feng, meanwhile, was mostly just enjoying the show. Building a legend is easy when your whole audience is grading on a curve that starts below you. Yan Hao, for his part, thought he was being sneaky. Every few nights he'd slip off toward the library pavilion to dig for intelligence for his father's people, creeping around, learning nothing, coming back empty-handed and pleased with himself. I watched him do it and said nothing, because a spy who thinks he's fooling you is easier to manage than one who knows he isn't. Also, it was funny. Watching a demonic lord's son tiptoe past me to go fail at espionage while I pretended to snore is the kind of small joy that gets you through a long con. And then Dragon Sparrow earned its keep for once. The bird had a nose for buried treasure, I've mentioned this, and one night it wouldn't stop dragging me toward a specific slab of bluestone out in the forest, hopping and screeching like it had found the mother lode. I went and put my hand near it and felt it, a column of pure, dense, spiritual energy rising off the stone, and underneath, a seal, a real one, layered and old and vicious. This was it. The hidden 7th-tier medicine the old lady's post was built to guard, sitting right under a rock 100 paces from my shack. My whole body wanted to crack it open and start counting years. And my whole brain, the part that had watched a genius get crippled and a rich girl kill herself chasing shortcuts, said, not yet. A seal like that doesn't just protect the treasure, it protects you from the treasure. Break it wrong and it breaks you. So I stood over the single largest deposit of lifespan I'd ever sensed, and I made myself walk away, and I waited. Patience is the only muscle in this world that actually scales. Good thing too. Because the old lady was almost out of time, and she had one last thing to teach me, and it was a test, disguised as a gift. She took me to the cliff on one of her last good days. There was a crack in the rock face that didn't look like anything, and behind it a secret realm, and behind the entrance to that, a formation she made very sure I understood. She pressed a jade pendant into my hand, the key, and a storage pouch stuffed with the ledgers of her whole secret life, and then she said the thing that was really the final exam. Don't walk straight in, she said. The formation isn't fully sealed. Go in the front the wrong way, and it'll grind a golden core cultivator to paste. It's a test. If you're careless, you deserve what you get. I have thought about that sentence a lot. She wasn't warning me. She was checking me. Every gift she'd handed me since the mountain demon had been a small test of whether the servant who fainted so conveniently was actually a fool or just a very good actor. And this was the last one, the biggest one. Walk in wrong and die, and she'd know she'd misjudged me. Walk in right, and she could go to her grave knowing the vault was in the hands of someone who thought before he grabbed. She also told me the one rule that mattered above the treasure, the Da Chun tree at the heart of it, the great camellia. Its formation gathered spiritual energy for the whole garden's ley line. Don't destroy it. Kill that tree to strip it for parts, and you'd starve the entire garden. Sustainable, she was telling me. Think like a farmer, not a thief. Then she did the last careful thing of a careful life. She walked back down to the executive hall and formally transferred her post to me, all proper, all on the books. And then she came home to the garden to die out in the open, in front of witnesses, on purpose, so that no one would ever have a reason to cut her body open and find the demonic path technique written in her bones. A spy to the very end, managing her own autopsy from beyond the grave. She left me a letter, and she left me one more thing tucked in with it, a Tier 5 purple orchid, her senior brother's old life-saving medicine, the most precious thing she owned, saved for decades for an emergency that never came. She left it to the servant boy. I read the letter alone. Then I did the only thing I know how to do with grief, which is turn it into something useful, because the alternative is just standing there feeling it. I plundered the purple orchid. Ding. 67 years. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. She saves the thing her dead love left her for 40 years and hands it to me on her way out, and I turn it into a number. But that's the honest shape of my cheat, and I won't pretty it up. The years went into the tank, and I promise you I felt every single one of them go in. Some things you turn into fuel because grief you can't spend is just weight, and I had a long way left to carry it. Then I went into the realm. Carefully, the right way. It opened up under the mountain like a lie the size of a country. 10 miles down, easy, a whole hidden world of spirit medicine fields laid out in tiers, more concentrated wealth in one cavern than the entire outer sect saw in a decade. And at the center of all of it stood the Da Chun tree, the great camellia, and when I read it I actually laughed out loud in the dark, alone, like a crazy person. 263 years old. Current lifespan 8,000. Ceiling 89,999. 90,000 years of potential in one tree. I reached up and picked a single fruit off a low branch, just to see. Ding! 80 years. Da Chun fruit. Tier 6. 80 years. From one fruit. And the tree grows more. Do you understand what I was standing under? This wasn't a treasure. Treasures run out. This was a money tree. A renewable, self-replenishing orchard of other people's lifespans. And the old lady had spent her death making sure I understood not to chop it down for a one-time payday. So I didn't. I stood there and did the math a farmer does, not a thief. And I decided the tree stays. You don't burn the field to sell the ash. You harvest it. Gently. Forever. And you get quietly, monstrously rich, while everyone up top thinks you're weeding radishes. I was still standing there falling in love with a plant when something came out of the dark and rushed me. Blue-faced. Fanged. Foundation establishment level. Moving wrong. Moving like a puppet on strings. And its face, when it got close enough, was stitched together out of two people I recognized. I brought my sword control up on reflex and got ready, because the last thing the old lady's vault had waiting for me, the guardian she'd built out of her own sins, had teeth, and it knew my name from the other side of death. The thing was Jiang Li and Xie Ming, both of them fused into one corpse general, the rich girl who'd wrinkled her nose at the dirt and the goofy kid who used to grin at everything, welded together and set to guard a hole in the ground. I want to be careful how I tell this part because it's the part where the joke stops. I took its head off with a thread of sword control. Clean, fast, and for 1 second, before the light went out, the head was lucid. Whatever was left of them surfaced, just long enough to look at me, and it didn't beg for mercy the way a monster begs, it begged the other way. Kill us. We're people, not monsters. Please. So I did. I put the point through the skull and I ended it, and that was the mercy. That was the whole gift I had to give. No joke landed there. There wasn't one. Shay Ming used to try to protect the weaker kids in the garden. Badly. With more heart than skill. Jiang Li was a spoiled brat who got a death sentence sold to her as a shortcut and never even understood the bill. And they both ended up as a lock on a door, and the kindest thing left in the world was a stranger with a sword who'd say yes when the last human piece of them asked to stop. I stood in that cave a while afterward. I didn't say anything clever. Some nights you just don't. Then I did what she taught me. I harvested, field by field, tier by tier, everything in that hidden world except the great camellia I'd sworn to keep. And my tank, which had been climbing in the hundreds and thousands, cracked past 10,000 years of banked lifespan, and the system gave me the thing that changed everything. Void barrier. Unlocked. For a price in years, I could wrap myself in a shell that ate all of it. Every technique of divination, perception, spying, deduction, every hidden watcher's attempt to read what I was doing. It was the answer to the one problem that had been quietly terrifying me for months. See, the trap of my whole cheat was never the getting strong. It was that getting strong makes noise. Force a breakthrough and the heavens notice. A tribulation gathers. Spiritual tides roll out for miles, and people come running to see who's ascending. The first time I'd shoved myself up a realm the wrong way, the sky had lit up and I'd felt 3 separate investigators turn their heads toward the garden. And I'd spent a very bad hour hiding and lying and learning that the real danger of power is the spotlight it turns on. Void barrier turned the spotlight off. Inside a 100-meter bubble, I could tear a hole in the sky and rebuild myself from the ground up, and to the outside world it would look like nothing at all. Like a gardener, meditating badly, same as always. So I found the most forgotten peak I could reach, wrapped myself in the dark, and went shopping like a man who has just discovered the store has no cameras. I dumped 1,000 years into my spiritual root, then another, and dragged the worthless talent everyone measured me by up to profound high. Then to earth rank, real talent now, genius talent, bought outright. Then I turned to my cultivation and stopped being polite about it. Foundation establishment, 9th level. Then the wall to golden core. And here, the old problem bared its teeth, because a proper golden core breakthrough wants a pill I didn't have, a nice safe cushion for the tribulation, and I had exactly none of that. So I did it the ugly way, the way that costs years and failed attempts, forcing the tribulation over and over on nothing but banked lifespan and stubbornness. And the void barrier swallowed every lightning strike so the mountains slept through my private war. Golden core. Then 8th level of golden core. And I didn't stop, because I was drunk on it now, so I kept pushing. Up through the wall into nascent soul, and paid for it. 700 years poured straight down the drain on tribulations I flunked for lack of a pill, until it finally took. Nascent soul, 4th level. Let that sit for a second. The servant with the cracked hoe, the paper bag talent, the file that said do not expect this one to survive the year, was now a nascent soul cultivator, secretly, in the dark, with a bird asleep on a branch nearby, and a whole sect below me that would have fainted if they'd read my numbers, and not a soul knew. That's the part I kept going back to. Turning it over like a warm coin. Not the power, the silence around the power. I sent my newborn nascent soul out for a test flight, this strange new sense where I could feel the shapes of energy across miles like heat in the dark, and that's when I felt the fight. 3 or 4 miles off, someone was running, and someone worse was chasing. A wounded man burning himself down to nothing to stay ahead of a killer, and the killer had the cold, patient signature of a professional. I almost ignored it. I had every reason to ignore it. It was somebody else's problem, somewhere else, and my entire life philosophy is a monument to minding my own business. Except I knew that wounded man. I'd weeded radishes next to him, and the killer chasing him kept saying, over and over, in a voice I could feel across the whole mountain, that Bai Fan had offended the Empress, and the price for that was his life. Bai Fan made it to the garden, on the last of his strength. Whatever was chasing him, that cold professional called Night Prowler who worked for the Empress, he'd somehow slipped, and I found out later he'd slipped it because he wasn't carrying just his own life in there. There was something else riding along in Bai Fan, an old ancestor's soul, a spark of the family's dead royalty tucked into the boy, and it had spent itself keeping him alive long enough to reach the one door on this mountain that had opened for him once before. Mine, again. The kid had a real talent for bleeding on my doorstep. I got back to find 2 things had changed while I was off secretly becoming a nascent soul. 1. Dragon Sparrow had gotten into the Dachshund fruit while I was away, and the little thieving menace was now the size of an eagle. Tier 2. Glaring at me with the smug energy of a bird that had eaten several centuries of premium lifespan and regretted nothing. 2. Bai Fan was face down and dying in the dirt. Here's where being strong in secret gets genuinely inconvenient. I could have healed him with a flick. I was a nascent soul standing over a boy at Foundation, but the whole point of me, the entire architecture of my survival, is that Ren Ye is a chi-refining gardener. and chi-refining gardeners cannot casually knit a royal heir's shredded meridians back together. So I healed him the slow, careful, deliberately clumsy way, dialing myself all the way down to chi-refining strength, and puttering around with herbs and basic technique like the humble pharmacist I pretend to be, dragging it out, making it look like hard work and luck. The juniors helped. It took the pressure off. Nobody watches the man who looks like he's barely managing. And while I was in there, patching him, that spark of old ancestor surfaced for a moment, a white-haired presence looking out through the boy's eyes. And it looked at me, right at me. It noted, with a kind of confused disdain, that the one who'd saved its descendant was blessed but talentless, some lucky, useless nobody. Then it did a very strange thing. It flinched. It said, later, to Baifan, that standing near me gave it the exact feeling of standing before its father the emperor, and then it dismissed that feeling as nonsense, because how could a gardener possibly carry the pressure of a sovereign? I kept my humble little face on and thought, buddy, you have no idea, and also, I need to be more careful. Even dialed down to nothing, something in me was leaking a pressure that ancient things recognized. The mask was good, it wasn't perfect. When Baifan came around, he thanked me the way he thanks everyone, which is by handing over something far too valuable and acting like it's nothing. This time it was the complete 9 profound chi. The whole thing, mind cultivation and general outline and all, where before he'd only left me the outer scraps. A real gift. From a guy who thought he was repaying a favor to a poor gardener. And of course I took it and fed it to the machine, and my 9 profound illusionary method evolved again, into the 9 extremes no-life technique. Sword soul and sword heart and sword body all folding into place. 2,000 years later, poured in on top of it, pushed it further still, up into a Azure Fen heavenly Luo art that came with something I hadn't asked for and didn't fully understand yet. A royal Tao aura, a sovereign's pressure baked into my sword, which in hindsight explains the old ancestors' flinch. I was quietly becoming a king in a gardener's robe, and it kept bleeding out the edges no matter how small I made myself. Then Dragon Sparrow almost got me killed. The bird, in the middle of Baifan's recovery, went nosing into a cabinet, popped it open, and there, in plain sight of a royal heir, were Dachun fruits. And Baifan took one look and went pale, because he recognized them, not as spirit medicine, as the sacred fruit of a demonic path tree. My tree. My beautiful renewable money tree was, to anyone who knew the old lineages, a signed confession that the harmless gardener had purple light pavilion secrets buried under his radishes. For one long second, my whole cover was a bird's beak away from coming apart. But here's the thing about Baifan, the thing that made him worth saving twice. He didn't jump to spy, he jumped to admire. He assumed I'd simply found the fruit, that a lucky gardener who'd raised a treasure-sniffing bird had stumbled onto something rare, and instead of turning me in, he offered me a deal. He'd buy 1 fruit off me, fair and square, and in exchange he gave me the Sun and Fen mirror. I need you to understand what that mirror was. It was one of the 3 great treasures of the Azure Fen royal family, offense and defense both, and more than that it had belonged to his late mother. He handed his dead mother's memento to a gardener to pay for a piece of fruit, because that's the kind of man he was, and because he trusted me, and I sat there holding it feeling like exactly the con artist I am. The joke of it, the small mercy of it, is that I couldn't even use the thing properly. Its power was tuned to Azure Fen blood I didn't have, so instead of obeying me, it just sort of imprinted on me and followed me around like a lovesick dog, hovering near my shoulder, bumping against me, a priceless royal artifact, behaving like a stray cat that had decided I was home now. I'd traded a fruit for a clingy legend. Baifan recovered up to the 7th level of foundation and left again. Lighter, grateful, no idea that the man he'd just enriched was 3 whole realms above him and hiding it under a hoe. And once the garden was quiet again, I went down to the vault to check on my other tenant. Because I wasn't the only thing living in that hidden realm anymore. A pill furnace had appeared down there, and a corpse had appeared with it. A dried-out, skin-and-bones thing that turned out to be very much awake, very much talking, and about to become the single best teacher I never asked for. The dried corpse in the pill furnace had a name, and a mouth, and opinions. Han Long. A purple light pavilion master who'd been slowly cooking himself back to life down in my vault for who knows how long, and when the formation's stored energy finally hit critical, he drank it all down and clawed his way from a skin and bones golden core 1st level back up to the 9th, and turned, in front of me, from a mummy into a perfectly normal, actually rather handsome man. He was aiming for nascent soul. He missed. Fell short, needed 5 more years and a tribulation pill he didn't have, and sat there in his refurbished body, radiating the specific fury of a man who'd bet everything on a jump and landed 1 inch short of the far ledge. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, this stranded demonic path Grand Master decided to teach me everything he knew. His logic was simple. I was the garden's keeper now, marked as one of his own faction whether I liked it or not, and a bored genius needs a project. So he taught me alchemy. He taught me corpse refining, the 10,000 karma profound corpse great method. the soul-capturing bell, the whole grim toolkit. I sat at his furnace like a diligent apprentice and soaked up centuries of forbidden knowledge from a man who thought he was cultivating an asset, and neither of us mentioned that I was already 3 realms above his ceiling. It was the second time in my life I'd shaken hands with someone certain he was using me. I was collecting them at this point. Meanwhile, the garden had grown into something I hadn't planned and couldn't quite bring myself to regret. I'd taken on apprentices. 4 of them, actual kids who called me master and meant it. There was Lin Bo, earnest and slow and loyal as a door. There was Guangzi, sharp-tongued, prickly, the kind of kid who insults you because he doesn't know how to say he cares. There was Rui Lan, and there was Chu Feng. Low talent, most of them, the sect's leftovers. Exactly the kind of nobody I used to be. And somewhere in the endless quiet years of running that garden, without deciding to, I'd built a family out of rejects. I told myself they were labor. I read them cover to cover the way I read everyone, and their ceilings were nothing special, and I kept them anyway. That should have told me something about myself. I ignored it, the way I ignore most true things about myself, and went back to pretending I only cared about lifespan and being left alone. For the record, I also read a lot of strange tales in those years, the trashy ghost romance serials everybody smuggled around the outer sect. A man needs hobbies that aren't murder. Yan Hao broke first. My bald houseplant, the demonic lord's son, had been failing at his own cultivation for years, quietly dying of a technique that had turned on him, and one night he couldn't carry the double life anymore. He came to me and confessed the whole thing. He was a purple light spy. His father was a demonic lord. He'd come to infiltrate the sect, and he was sick of it, sick of the family, sick of being a weapon, and he wanted out. He wanted to just be a person who grew herbs in a garden and had friends. I want you to appreciate the comedy of my position here. A purple light spy tearfully confessing his purple light secret to a man who is, on paper, also a purple light spy, begging that man for the moral high ground. So I gave it to him. I put on my most solemn, mentor of the year face, told him that a man is not his father and a past is not a sentence, welcomed the reformed sinner into the light, and kept him on as my pharmacist. He wept with gratitude at the wisdom of Master Feng. Master Feng, internally, was thinking that this was the single most useful spy in the history of espionage, because he'd just handed me his entire allegiance in exchange for a speech. 2 liars, and the con was still running, and somehow it had turned into loyalty on both ends, without either of us admitting it. Then Han Long decided to test whether his star pupil had any real talent, and I nearly overplayed my hand. My alchemy, honestly, was mediocre, and he despaired at it. This great grandmaster stuck teaching a kid with clumsy hands. So I threw him a bone and claimed my talent was in movement techniques instead. Fine, he said, prove it, and he built a killing formation around me, a real one. Blades and blind chi, the kind that shreds a foundation cultivator into ribbons. And I, a secret nascent soul, strolled through it. I read every blind spot the way you'd read a picture book, drifted through the gaps like the whole lethal machine was a garden path, and came out the other side without a scratch, yawning. Han Long stared at me like I'd grown a second head. He'd meant to humble me. Instead, he'd just watched a chi-refining gardener walk untouched through a formation that should have killed a man 10 grades above me, and to a demonic path grandmaster that reads as exactly one thing: monstrous, buried talent. He didn't get suspicious. He got excited. He promised, right there, to teach me the demonic shadow clone, one of the 5 great secret arts of the Purple Light Pavilion, a treasure his own sect guarded with blood. I bowed and thanked my generous master. And filed it. Because a movement art that could split me into copies and hide the real me was going to be worth more than he could possibly imagine, and I was building, one borrowed secret at a time, a toolkit that no single teacher had ever seen the whole of. That's the quiet advantage of being everyone's underestimated student. You get all the pieces. You're the only one holding the finished picture. By the time I was 28, I still hadn't aged a day past a healthy young man, and the outside world was starting to press in on my quiet little garden, whether I wanted it to or not. It came in with the tournament. The Immortal Seed Assembly, a big sub-Golden Core competition that pulled sects in from everywhere. Purple Light, the Fire God Sect, the 7 Killings, the Valley of 10,000 Poisons, all of them converging on Taiqing's region to show off their young talents. I got a front-row seat to none of it, which was exactly how I liked things, except that my little training ground cleaning job put me right in the path of the people who mattered. There was a scholar named Zhang Jing who employed me, and there was an intersect deacon called Wei Chuan, Golden Core 9th level, whose numbers I read out of habit: 106 years old, 618 of lifespan against a ceiling of 1,500 and change. Middling, comfortable. The kind of man who runs errands for power and calls it power. And then Li Qin walked back into my life and hired me. Now, Li Qin is Prince Zhenbei's only daughter, which makes her royalty, and she is also, technically, Bai Fan's childhood sister. And despite the delicate name, she has the temperament of a drawn blade. She had a private spirit medicine field, a good one, thick with 4th and 5th tier stock, and she needed someone reliable and unambitious to tend it. Enter me, the reliable, unambitious gardener. I took the job for the most honest reason I have, which is that a rich woman's medicine field is a rich woman's lifespan orchard, and I get paid to walk through it. But I took it nervous, because the assembly meant purple light people would be crawling all over the region, and purple light might remember it technically owned me, and a spy who gets handed a mission is a spy who gets exposed. So I asked Han Long, straight out, whether the pavilion was going to come collect. And Han Long, my grandmaster, my protector, waved it off like I'd asked whether the sky would fall on Tuesday. No one, he said, would dare give his personal disciple an assignment. And then he told me the thing that finally showed me the true size of the room I'd been standing in. The garden wasn't a purple light outpost. It was one of six separate bases the pavilion had grown inside the Taiqing sect over centuries, roots so deep and so patient that one of their agents had climbed all the way to Elder. The #1 immortal sect on the continent, the proud, ancient Taiqing, was riddled through the middle with demonic path sleepers, and had been for longer than anyone alive remembered. I sat with that for a while. I'd thought I was a small man hiding in a small garden. Turns out my small garden was one cell in a tumor the whole mountain didn't know it had. And I, the accidental heir to one of those cells, was the only person on either side who wanted absolutely nothing to do with any of it. I just wanted to farm. The universe kept handing me a war. I coped the way I cope. I threw a party. I'd been quietly reconstructing the spring festival for years. The lanterns, the red couplets, the big loud New Year's dinner, dragging a piece of a world nobody here had ever seen into my little garden of rejects. And by now it was a tradition. The kids loved it. Lin Bo hung the lanterns crooked. Guangzi pretended he was too cool for it, and then ate more than anyone. For one night a year, the garden of leftovers looked like a home, and I let myself, just for the length of a dinner, not be a schemer. That's the warm thread I won't apologize for. A man can hold 100 secrets and still want a table with people at it. Which is, of course, exactly when the demons showed up. 2 Tianyin sect cultivators dropped into the middle of my festival like a pair of vultures onto a picnic. Mo Kai, a ghost path type with a 10,000 souls banner, and Yun Xia, a charm caster. An enchantress, both of them hunting exactly what the Tianyin sect always hunts: strong divine souls and healthy bodies to wear. They looked at my garden full of low-talent kids and saw groceries. And they looked at me, the weak gardener standing protectively in front of my apprentices, and saw the weakest thing in the room. I could have ended them where they stood, one thought each. But there were witnesses, and there were my kids, and Renye the gardener cannot vaporize 2 Tianyin cultivators at a New Year's dinner without becoming a very interesting mystery. So I did the thing I always do. I played the frightened weakling, spun a story about a treasure and a seal hidden out past the tree line, dangled it in front of their greed, and led them away from my kids and out into the dark where nobody would see what happened next. They followed me like the fools that greed makes of everyone. And somewhere out past the lanterns, well away from the warm table and the crooked decorations and the family I wasn't ready to admit I had, I stopped walking, and turned around, and stopped being a gardener. Except my kids had already hit the panic button. One of them had a jade talisman keyed to Bai Fan, and they'd used it, and now Bai Fan and Li Qin were both incoming, fast, coming to save the weak gardener from the 2 demons. Which was a problem, because 2 royal cultivators showing up meant witnesses, and it also meant those 2 royal cultivators were about to walk straight into a fight above their weight class. I got there first, hidden, and I watched Mo Kai unfurl that 10,000 souls banner, and the air filled with the screaming of 10,000 wrong dead, a wall of grief and hate that folded Bai Fan and Li Qin up like paper. They were going to die, both of them. The royal heir I'd saved twice, and the sharp-tongued princess who signed my paychecks, about to be soul-eaten at my own New Year's party. So I reached out, from the shadows, with the kind of control I'd bought with tens of thousands of years, and I pinched. Both demonic cultivators dropped. Their hearts burst inside their chests, not a mark on the meridians, not a scratch on the skin, just 2 hearts stopped like someone had reached through the world and squeezed. Ding, ding, 2 more deposits in the tank. And clean, surgical, terrifying. The kind of kill that tells anyone who understands cultivation that whoever did it is so far above the situation that they can turn off your heart without disturbing the ribs around it. Bai Fan understood. That's the trouble with saving smart people. He and his old ancestor put it together fast. A nascent soul expert, at minimum, hidden somewhere near this garden, had just executed 2 Tianyin cultivators without being seen. And from that night on, Bai Fan carried a new suspicion around with him. Gentle and persistent. Something was hiding in the herb garden. Something strong. He didn't suspect me, exactly. Who would? But he knew the garden had a ghost, and he was the kind of man who couldn't leave a mystery alone. When I strolled back in, safe, playing the trembling survivor, my apprentices swarmed me, half of them crying, checking me for wounds, furious at themselves for leaving me alone with monsters. Lin Bo actually sobbed. And I stood there, a great ascension cultivator, in a gardener's robe, being fussed over by children who thought they'd nearly lost their fragile master, and I let them, because some lies you tell aren't for you. They needed me to be someone they could protect. So I was. The dinner resumed. Everyone got drunk. Everyone except me, because nascent soul and up don't get drunk unless they decide to. And I had decided very firmly against it, mostly because a tipsy Yan Hao at the far end of the table kept lurching toward the words Purple Light Pavilion, and I kept having to redirect him with the urgency of a man defusing a bomb with his elbows. And then Bai Fan, who'd stayed for the festival, ran his own quiet little test on me. He dropped an exploding spirit pearl near me. Casual, deniable, the kind of thing that flares bright in proportion to the cultivation of whoever's standing next to it. A lie detector for hidden strength. And this is where all those years of feeding lifespan into the right techniques paid a dividend I hadn't even bought on purpose. My 10,000 spirits wood origin scripture doesn't just make me strong, it hides what it makes. The pearl sat there next to a secret great ascension cultivator and glowed the dim, sad little glow of a man barely scraping chi refining. Bai Fan looked at that dull ember, and the last of his suspicion about me personally went quiet. The garden had a ghost, sure, but the gardener was just Renye. Harmless, confirmed by the pearl. He left satisfied. I refilled his cup on the way out and thought, not for the last time, that the safest place to hide a mountain is behind a molehill everyone's already measured. Later, drunk and generous and grateful for the festival, Han Long finally made good and taught me the demonic shadow clone. The manual was written in dense old script that gave me a headache. One of those texts where you half expect the protagonist to have a magic auto-translation that spares him the homework, and I got no such mercy. I just ground through it line by cramped line. But I got it. A copy of me, walking, fighting, dying, indistinguishable from the real thing, while I stood somewhere else entirely, watching. For a man whose entire life is the art of not being where people think he is, it was less a technique than a philosophy with a body count. I mastered it, pushed my hidden cultivation up toward the peak of nascent soul's later stages while I was at it, and got ready for the next breakthrough. And right on cue, because my life does not do quiet, I felt a golden core level presence come drifting toward the garden through the dark, and I sighed the sigh of a man who just wants to farm, and went to see who it was this time. It wasn't an enemy this time. It was a suitor, which is worse, because enemies at least have the decency to be trying to kill you. His name was Xu Bin, and he arrived in Li Qin's company wearing his cultivation like a borrowed coat, foundation 3rd level, all of it drug boosted, the whole thing bought and paid for by his golden core mother pouring pills down his throat. He had the exact energy of a boy who has never once been told no and is about to find out what the word feels like, because I'd overheard him, a little earlier, confessing to Li Qin in the field, and I'd heard her turn him down flat. What made it my problem was that Li Qin, in the middle of turning him down, defended me, said something kind about the gardener, held me up as more of a man than him, purely to twist the knife. And Xu Bin, being the kind of creature he was, couldn't reach the princess who'd rejected him, so he turned to the target he could reach. He challenged me. A duel. No spiritual power, no cultivation, just bodies, so the great foundation young master could beat the useless gardener half to death and feel like a man again. I want to be clear that I could have stopped his heart across the field the way I'd stopped the demons. Instead, I gave him the fight of his life and let him win it. I toyed with him first, because I'm not a saint. I dropped into a low, tight little stance, hands up, all economy and angles, the kind of thing that looks humble right up until it isn't, and I let him swing and miss, until the crowd started to laugh at the wrong person. And then, before it got dangerous to my cover, I ran out of stamina. I sold it beautifully. Gardener's lungs, gardener's legs, a good show, and then a collapse. And Xu Bin got to stand over the wheezing servant and collect his hollow little victory. It cost him everything. Li Qin watched him beat a man who'd clearly been outclassing him for fun and then folded on purpose, and whatever thin thread of respect she'd had for Xu Bin snapped clean. She dumped him on the spot, in public, and then, furious and guilty, came and fussed over the injured gardener, pressed a bag of spirit stones into my hands, and stormed off. Xu Bin left with nothing. Losers who mistake a woman's pity for a door tend to. I lay in the dirt collecting my winnings, both the spirit stones and the years of watching a bully learn a lesson, and thought that this was, on balance, a very good day at the office. Then Dragon Sparrow found the egg. The bird dragged me out to a ravine, screeching the way it screeches when it's found something worth more than my dignity, and there it was, half buried, a giant egg webbed all over with deep blue patterns and leaking spiritual pressure like a cracked dam. I took it to Han Long, because Han Long knew every lineage worth knowing, and he took one look and his refurbished face went pale. "Do you know what this is?" he said. "A very large breakfast? It's an ink jade qilin egg." He said it like a curse and a prayer at once. "A sacred beast of the 7 profound valley, a divine beast bloodline, The kind of creature that grows into 8th tier power and above. It bonds to exactly one master, once, forever. And if that master dies, it goes mad and tears the world apart looking for the person who did it. A living weapon with abandonment issues. Han Long practically begged me to keep it and raise it. An 8th tier beast at my side, he pointed out, would outweigh every threat the 7 Profound Valley could ever throw at me, and the valley would move heaven and earth to get this egg back if they knew where it was. So he took it off to incubate in secret, and I filed away one more piece nobody else had the whole picture of. The immortal seed assembly finally wound down, and I learned, secondhand, that the great mysterious commotion out west, the one that had half the visiting sects in an uproar, had been over exactly this. My egg. Dragon Sparrow, in the course of finding it, had stirred up a hornet's nest of factions all scrambling for a divine beast egg none of them could locate. I'd been the eye of a continent-spanning storm and slept through most of it because that is, apparently, my entire brand. Fan, before he left again, pressed a foundation pill into my hand for no reason except friendship. One more valuable thing casually handed to the gardener by someone who thought he was doing charity. I thanked him. I did not tell him I could have crushed that pill to powder with a thought. Some kindnesses you just take and keep and remember. And then a law enforcement elder named Huo Ming decided to hold his nascent soul tribulation right next to my garden, and everything I'd built out of patience nearly went up in one afternoon. Here's the thing about a nascent soul tribulation. It pulls power out of the land to feed the crossing, and Huo Ming, in his infinite consideration, set his up right on top of my garden's ley line. So while he was up there wrestling with the heavens and becoming a nascent soul, the formation under him was draining my ground dry, and my spirit medicine fields, the ones I'd spent years and tens of thousands of banked years building, started to die. The soil cracked, the beds collapsed. Plants I'd raised from seed withered in an afternoon so that some elder I'd never met could have a smoother breakthrough. To most people that's an inconvenience. To me, whose entire existence is measured in the lifespan those plants represent, it was a man walking into my bank and setting the vault on fire to light his cigar. I have never in my life been angrier at anyone than I was at Huo Ming, and I've met people who tried to eat my soul. But you don't kill a law enforcement elder in daylight because he trampled your radishes. So I sat on it, and while I sat on it I did what I do when I need money, and distraction at the same time. I wrote a book. I sat down and wrote Journey to the West, the whole thing, from the monkey's point of view, a stone-born troublemaker punching his way through heaven, and I handed it to the Scripture Pavilion, and the sect took its usual robber's cut, 70% to them for the crime of owning a printing press. Except it caught the eye of an elder named Chen Hao, Golden Core, a genuine book lover in a sect full of killers, and Chen Hao fell in love with the monkey. He championed it, bullied the pavilion into a fairer 40% for the author, and asked only one thing in return, that I keep writing under my pen name. Lone Cloud Scroll. Don't laugh. Actually do. Everyone else did, and it still made me famous across the whole continent, while my real name stayed a servant's afterthought. The perfect disguise. Everyone knew the author, nobody knew the man. And then, once the books were selling and the accountants were happy, I dealt with Huo Ming. Quietly. Personally. On my own terms. I went out at night, masked in bark stripped from the dachun tree so nothing could read my chi, and I found him where he'd set up his cursed formation, that Big Dipper 7-sword array he was so proud of. I didn't fly in. I didn't announce myself. I stood 10 miles off, out past the edge of anywhere a sane person would look for an attacker, and I picked a single leaf off a branch, and I poured a thread of power into it, and I flicked it. 10 miles. One leaf. It crossed the distance like a rumor, slipped through his 7-sword formation like the formation was a bead curtain, and punched clean through his golden core. Huo Ming, mid-breakthrough, coughed up his own blood, felt his life's work crack down the middle, and fled for the horizon, with no idea what had hit him, or from where. He survived. Barely. I let him, because a dead elder is an investigation, and a crippled one is just a mystery, and I've always preferred mysteries. But a strike like that doesn't stay quiet. An elder nearly killed by an invisible attacker from 10 miles out, by a weapon no one could trace, in a sect that prided itself on knowing everything, that got a name attached to it fast, a masked sword immortal. A phantom on the mountain who could kill through walls and distance and formations without ever being seen. The sect master himself put out a decree, and nascent soul experts started combing the outer sect looking for a ghost, and I, the ghost, kept my head down and watered my recovering plants, and wore the most confused expression I could manage whenever anyone mentioned the terrifying masked stranger. I'd just written the first line of a legend that would eventually swallow the whole story. I didn't know that yet. I just knew my garden was mine again, and the man who'd burned it had learned, without ever learning who taught him, that some radishes have teeth. The Huo Ming panic faded, the way all panics fade when there's nothing to catch. Journey to the West became a sect-wide obsession, then a continent-wide one, and the money and the influence rolled in, and I poured it all back into the garden, expanding, filling every corner of that hidden realm with medicine, growing my orchard of years wider and deeper. Life was, for a stretch, almost exactly what I'd always said I wanted. Quiet, green, profitable. Then Hanlong's time ran out. His 10 years in my vault were up, and he left the way a demonic path Grandmaster leaves, with a shadow clone illusion and a promise to see me again, secretly planning, I knew, to bring me to the Purple Light Pavilion's main altar one day and present his prize student to the people who owned us both. I saw him off with real feeling. He taught me alchemy and corpsecraft and shadow arts and a dozen forbidden things, and he'd done it all while completely wrong about who I was, and I'd grown, against my own better judgment, a little fond of the arrogant old corpse. He walked off certain he held my leash. He held nothing, but I let him keep the illusion, because that's what you do for a teacher, even a demonic one, especially a demonic one. You never know when you'll need the lesson to have been free. Not every kid who came through the garden was worth keeping, and the next batch taught me a rule I've never broken since. I took on 3 of them for the heavy labor: Duan Li, Guo Xin, Bai Song, 18 and 19 and full of themselves. And they lasted right up until they noticed something that, to a normal, ambitious disciple, is damning. Their master, after all these years, was still stuck at Qi refining, 7th level supposedly. Not a single breakthrough to show for a decade. To them that wasn't a disguise, it was a verdict. They'd bet their futures on a loser, so they quit. And they didn't do it quietly, they did it with insults, told me to my face they'd worshipped the wrong master, and walked out sneering. And at the gate, on their way down, 3 things happened in a row that must have felt like the world laughing at them. First they ran into Wang Kang, back visiting, who greeted me with the deep bow you give a great master. Then Bai Fan flew in out of the sky to see his old friend the gardener, royal and radiant, and clearly, obviously close to me. The quitters stood there watching a returning disciple and a royal heir treat the loser they just spat on like someone who mattered, and you could see the math happening behind their eyes, the slow horror of people realizing they'd walked away from the one door in the building that opened onto anything. They came back, of course, especially once they caught wind that I had a foundation pill on hand, courtesy of Bai Fan. They knelt at the gate for days, foreheads in the dirt, begging to be taken back, singing a very different song about whose master I was, and I said no. Flatly, permanently, no. Because here is the rule. The one Zhang Li's death and Yan Hao's confession and a decade of watching people had burned into me. I will forgive almost anything except betrayal. And a betrayer I've seen once I never trust again. Talent, I can buy by the 1,000 year. Loyalty is the only thing in this world I can't manufacture, and the moment someone shows me they don't have it, they've told me everything I need to know. They left for good, eventually, cursing, and 30 years from now they'll still be nobodies. And that's not cruelty, that's just the bill coming due. Meanwhile, the good one stayed. Su Jia, sharp and stubborn and genuinely trying, had climbed to the 8th level of Qi refining on nothing but grit, and when she asked me real questions, I gave her real answers. Tutored her quietly, watched her actually understand. When I told her to come to my room to go over a technique, half the garden decided it meant something else entirely, and the gossip nearly set the place on fire, which, fine, let them. The girl earned her reward, and I gave it to her in the open, publicly. The foundation pill Bai Fan had left me, handed to the disciple who'd stayed loyal and worked. She broke through, and then she kissed me on the cheek, told me to wait, that she'd win me over yet, and left the mountain to make her name. I let her go with a brotherly pat and a lot of unspoken affection, because she was family, the little sister kind, and some feelings you keep exactly the shape they are, and don't let anyone talk you into reshaping. I also wrote another book in there, Investiture of the Gods, Gods and Generals and a War Across Heaven, and it hit even harder than the monkey, and Elder Chen Hao loved it like his own child, and Lone Cloud Scroll became a name spoken in every tea house on the continent, while Ren Ye stayed a servant nobody could pick out of a crowd. Best disguise money ever bought. The louder the pen name got, the quieter the man behind it could live. And then, down in the vault, the egg finally hatched, and I nearly killed the divine beast on day 1. I went down to check on it, and something struck at me from the dark, a venomous underground serpent, fast and huge, and I turned to deal with it and found it already dead, and standing over the corpse, no bigger than a dog, black-scaled and fierce and blinking up at me, was the newborn Ink Jade Qilin. It had killed the snake defending its own nest, and I, not recognizing it in the chaos, swatted it. 10% power, sent the poor thing tumbling. Then I fed it a Da Chun fruit by way of apology, and that was that. It bonded to me on the spot, licked my hand, flopped over, and became, functionally, a dog. A divine beast of legend, a creature the 7 Profound Valley would burn continents to reclaim, and it spent its first week following me around the garden wagging a tail it wasn't supposed to have. Aren't you supposed to be a dragon? I asked it. It licked my face. I gave up. I took my new dog-shaped apocalypse on a tour of the vault and let it clear out the realm's lingering threats, which it did with delight, and which fattened my tank by a few more centuries, and honestly, of all the world-ending weapons I'd accidentally collected, it was easily the most affectionate. Fan came by not long after, and this time his visit had a weight to it. He told me he was going away on a long, dangerous trip, some ancient immortal secret realm legacy trial, sub-golden core only, the kind of thing people don't always come back from. He said it lightly. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you're not sure you'll see them again and you don't want to say so, and I told him to come back in one piece, again, the way I always did, and meant it, again, the way I always did. That was the last easy goodbye we got for a long time. Because the trip he was walking into, and the family he was walking away from, were about to drag the whole royal rot of the Azure Fen dynasty right up my quiet garden path. Chu Feng, one of my apprentices, had finally admitted he was never going to cultivate his way anywhere, and instead of moping, he asked if he could raise spirit beasts. He'd been a shepherd before the sect, he said. He was good with animals. And a little bell went off in my head, the accountant's bell, because a spirit beast has spiritual energy in it, and a thing with spiritual energy in it is, to me, a coin with legs. So we built a farm. Horned sheep, argali, breeding stock that would drop a new crop every year, a self-replenishing herd of walking lifespan, and I got to look like a soft-hearted master indulging a boy's hobby while actually opening a second orchard that happened to be made of livestock. The bureaucracy was a headache. Only proper outer disciples could purchase beasts, so I laundered the whole thing through Wang Kang and Sujia as guarantors, and while I was down at the halls arranging it, I learned the sect was quietly tearing itself apart. Some ugly power struggle between the law enforcement hall and the sect master, the kind of rot that always sets in when a place gets old and rich and forgets what it's for. On the way home, an old man tried to steal my body. I mean that literally. He looked like a harmless traveler, nascent soul second level, and the second I got close, he lunged for a possession, tried to evict my soul and move into my flesh. His mistake was picking a house that was already occupied by something much worse than a gardener. My nascent soul, forged out of Azure Fen's sword arts, tore into him before he'd finished the incantation, shredded his spirit, and devoured what was left. Ding. 232 years. And a name, pulled out of the wreckage of his mind. Luo Tian, the father of a Tianyin sect deputy leader, an injured infiltrator who'd gambled his last strength on a fresh young body and drawn the one door in the world that ate him instead. He'd even stolen some of my sheep on the way in, which I found genuinely offensive, and I took them back off his corpse, along with a blood spirit pill formula, some Tianyin blood sacrifice horror I filed away and had no intention of ever using. I just wanted to farm. I kept saying it, to no one, like a prayer. Why do they keep coming? They kept coming because I'd left a trail, and the trail was starting to attract professionals. An enforcement team traced the old man's ashes back toward my region, Chonghu at the head of it, a nascent soul 8th level, and walking beside him, of all people, Wen Tao, the crippled genius from that first night, except he wasn't crippled anymore. He'd clawed his way all the way back to Golden Core. They came sniffing at the garden, and I braced for it, and then Wen Tao, remembering that I'd once handed him the location of the mountain demon and his revenge, vouched for me, spoke up for the harmless gardener, and they left. That's the return on an old kindness, sometimes, years later, at exactly the moment you need it. A man you helped when it cost you nothing, standing between you and the people with the questions. By then, the masked sword immortal from the Huo Ming affair had grown into a full sect legend, a phantom nobody could find, and I got to enjoy the surreal experience of listening to nascent souls theorize about a terrifying hidden master while that master fed his sheep and pretended to have opinions about the weather. 3 years rolled on. The herd grew to hundreds. My tank crept up toward 100,000 years. A number so large I could barely think about it as lifespan anymore. It was just fuel now. Potential energy, waiting for me to decide what to spend it on. And then the emperor came to my garden looking for his son. He didn't announce himself as the emperor, of course. He arrived as a refined scholar, elegant, unhurried, calling himself a man from Yanzhou, asking after his good-for-nothing child. But I read him the second he walked in, and the numbers made my stomach drop. Soul transformation 7th level, 284 over 1,000, 36, over a ceiling of 3,400 and change. Azure Fen royalty. And not just any royal. This was Bai Fan's father. This was Qinzhen, the man himself, the sovereign, standing in my herb garden in a borrowed scholar's robe. And for the first time in a long time my cover felt thin, because a soul transformation cultivator sees a great deal more than a foundation kid with an exploding pearl. He stayed. He let Guangzi host him, and he watched. He asked my apprentices, gently, what kind of master I was, the way a man asks questions when he's really measuring the answerer. Guangzi, prickly, loyal Guangzi, told him flat out that if he had a next life he'd sign up to be my apprentice again in it, and the emperor filed that away, and also, in passing, warned Guangzi that the sword technique he was practicing was bad for his health, which was the first thread of a knot I'd have to untangle later. I served the disguised emperor tea and played the humble gardener and felt, the whole time, like a man sharing a small room with a tiger that hasn't decided yet whether it's hungry. And right in the middle of that careful, dangerous houseguest, my tank finally rolled over 100,000 years, and the system unlocked something new. Something that let me buy answers instead of muscle. And the first question I was tempted to spend it on was standing in my garden, drinking my tea, smiling like he had all the time in the world. The new unlock was called Severing Heaven's Secrets, and it let me spend lifespan to deduce fate itself, to pull answers about people and futures straight out of the world. I tested it once, aimed it at the disguised emperor to read exactly why he'd come, and the system quoted me the price. 600 years. 600 years of banked lifespan to answer one question about one man. I cancelled it so fast I nearly pulled a muscle. Some answers you just wait for. They're cheaper. But the 100,000 years the tool implied I was sitting on, that was real, and once the emperor had wandered off to see Li Qin, I finally let myself go shopping at a scale I'd never dared before. I found my quiet corner, wrapped the void barrier around me thick enough to hide a war, and started spending 10,000 years into my body, and the Overlord body scripture evolved into the Sky Vault Overlord body, and it came with a gift I hadn't asked for, an imperial domineering aura, a field I could throw out that withered and drank the spiritual energy of everything caught in it. Excellent for clearing crowds, the system helpfully noted, like it was reviewing a kitchen appliance. Then 50,000 years poured into my spiritual root and dragged that worthless servant's talent all the way up to heaven rank, high grade, the rarest tier in the entire dynasty. There was exactly one other person in the whole Taiqing sect with a root that good, and the fact that the sect had even one was a large part of why it was the #1 sect on the continent. Now there were two. The other one didn't know he existed, weeded radishes, and answered to the name of a servant. And then I broke through, over and over, the way you can only break through when you've stopped counting the cost. 10,000 years into cultivation, and I forced my way up through soul transformation, failing 3 tribulations, eating the losses, forcing it again until it took. Then higher. Soul transformation 9th level. Then the wall to Great Ascension, and over it, into Great Ascension 2nd level, my nascent soul folding into a primordial spirit as body and soul began to fuse into one thing, a second self identical to me in every way, able to leave my body and drift for hundreds of miles like a ghost with my face. The gardener with the cracked hoe was now a Great Ascension cultivator, one of the small handful of genuinely terrifying beings on the whole continent, and he was hiding it under a straw hat, and the only witnesses were a lovesick royal mirror and a divine beast that thought it was a dog. Which was the exact moment, of course, that the sect's investigation into the vanished spiritual vein, the one I'd drained during all this, came knocking. A nascent soul team, led by a man named John Kang, found the illusion wall I'd hidden my cave behind, felt the dense chi leaking off it, and did what greedy cultivators always do when they sense treasure behind a wall. They broke it open. I'd have let them leave. I really would have. I'm not a killer by hobby, whatever the body count suggests. But they came through that wall grinning about the fortune they were about to loot. And I was mid-breakthrough with my defenses thin, and there are lines. So I ended them. Sword chi, clean, the whole team, and I burned the bodies so there'd be nothing to read. And I thought that was that, until a soul transformation primordial spirit came screaming out of the dark for revenge. A Taiqing elder who'd felt his people die, and he was strong, genuinely strong, the first real pressure I'd felt in years. And I met him with the heavenly poison hand. That vicious Jietian sect art Han Long had taught me on a drunken night, and I crushed him with it. That was a mistake, not the killing, the method. Because on Taiqing's main peak, an old white-haired elder felt that specific technique land from across the whole sect and went pale and said a name out loud that I hadn't earned yet. That was Wei's poisonous hand, he said. That old bastard. He thought a legendary demonic path monster had come out of hiding, and he raised the alarm across the entire Taiqing sect. A great demon has attacked. Sound every bell, wake every elder. I stood in the ashes of a search party, a Great Ascension cultivator in a gardener's robe, and listened to the mountain wake up screaming about a demon that didn't exist, hunting a phantom that was me, and thought, with the weary honesty of a man who has given up arguing with his own life, I just wanted to farm. And now I've got a whole sect out for the head of a monster I accidentally impersonated. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. The next morning, before I'd even finished pretending to be worried about the demon everyone else was worried about, Rui Lan came flying into my room, screaming that Guangzi had lost his mind. He had too. My prickly, loyal apprentice was tearing through the garden in a berserk fury, sword out, and he'd already wounded poor Lin Bo before anyone could stop him. This was the thing the Emperor had warned about, that sword technique that was bad for the boy's health, finally coming due. Some emotion path art called the Yuan 2-6 Swords, a soul transformation tier legacy Guangzi had inherited from his father, a blind swordsman with enemies I didn't know about yet, and it had turned on the kid the way these greedy shortcut arts always do, feeding on his heart until there was nothing left but the blade. I cleared everyone out. And then I did something that told the disguised emperor more about me than I meant to. I went to Qinzhen and asked him to heal Guangzi, because I'd watched his face the day before, watched him clock the technique and get that little knowing look, and I deduced that the elegant scholar from Yenzhou understood exactly what was eating my apprentice. He was amused, being seen through by a gardener, but he did it. One finger to Guangzi's brow, and the heart demon guttered out like a snuffed candle, and the boy came back to himself, exhausted and ashamed and alive. And then the emperor looked at me with new eyes and said the words that meant the careful houseguest was done being careful. Come, let's have tea and discuss the Tao. So we drank tea, the sovereign and the servant, and he wanted to talk about my books. Journey to the West, Investiture of the Gods, King Zhao of Yue against Sovereign Han, he mused. Which tyrant is the more pathetic figure? And I gave careful, hedged little answers, because you do not debate philosophy with a soul transformation emperor from a position of foundation establishment unless you enjoy the taste of your own foot. But he wasn't really asking about kings. He was building to a thesis, and he laid it out for me plainly, turning his teacup in his fingers. It's all the same disease, he said, the tyrant and the fool. It's all because we aren't strong enough. A cruel man with power is untouchable, and a good emperor without it is a joke history laughs at. Strength is the only thing that makes any of it matter. Everything else is a story we tell to feel better about being weak, and I sat there and played along, nodding at the wisdom, hiding the fact that I was probably stronger than the man lecturing me about strength, and thinking, privately, that he was half right in the way that powerful people are always half right, which is the dangerous half. Then he stopped performing, and he showed me who he was. He used the imperial eye, the one only a sovereign uses, and I set down my cup and bowed and called him Your Majesty, and he waved it off and told me to call him Uncle instead, which from an emperor is either the warmest thing in the world or the most terrifying, and with Qinzhen it was both. And then he recruited me. Not despite my useless talent. Because of it, he wanted a man who was loyal and low profile and unambitious, and completely uninterested in power, to run one of his private secret realms, grow his medicine and his beasts, a rank 4 posting, quiet and rich. But that was the cover story, and we both knew it. The real reason, the one under the words, was Bai Fan. The emperor was estranged from his son, had been for decades, a wound he didn't know how to close, and here was the gardener that son trusted more than anyone alive. He wasn't hiring a farmer, he was hiring a bridge back to his own child, and he was too proud to say so. So he said medicine and beasts and rank 4, and I heard the real thing underneath, and I agreed. I agreed because it meant more lifespan income, obviously. That's what I told myself. But I also agreed because I'd seen the look on a father's face when he thought no one was measuring it, and there was a whole grief in there that no amount of soul transformation power could touch, and something in me, the part that keeps adopting rejects and won't admit it, wanted the estrangement mended too. Before he left, I tried to give him back the sun and fen mirror. It was his family's. It had been his dead wife's, Bai Fan's mother's, and it had come to me by accident and stayed by accident, and it felt wrong to keep a widower emperor's late wife's memento in a gardener's cabinet. He wouldn't take it. He looked at the mirror for a long moment, and something crossed his face that he didn't let finish, and he told me to keep it. It had chosen me, he said. Let it stay. And then he went off to visit Li Qin, and I stood there holding a dead empress's mirror that hovered near my shoulder like it missed her, and I understood that I'd just been folded into the private sorrows of the most powerful family on the continent, whether I wanted to be or not. I did not want to be. I never want to be. And it never, ever matters. The Yuan 2-6 swords. The art that had nearly turned Guangzi into a puppet, I made him give up. I sat the kid down and told him to stop, and he fought me on it, the way prickly loyal kids fight everything, and then I made it simple. People before swordsmanship, I said. A technique that eats your heart isn't a technique, it's a slow suicide with good marketing. And Guangzi, who would sign up to be my apprentice again in the next life, chose me over the blade. He put it down. He passed the loyalty test he didn't know was a test. And I, quietly, kept the manual. Learned the whole cursed thing myself, because a technique that devours a normal cultivator's heart does nothing at all to a man whose soul is forged out of imperial sword arts, and once I'd wrung it dry, I burned it, so it could never bite anyone again. That's the pattern of my whole life, really. I eat the poisons that kill other people, and I turn them into fuel, and then I make very sure the poison never reaches anyone I've decided to keep. Around then, my body and soul finished fusing, and I stepped up to Great Ascension's second level under the void barrier, quiet as ever, and my perception stretched out to 500 li, half a province I could feel in my sleep. And the same week, Sujia snuck into my garden at midnight to ask me to run away with her. She was serious. Foundation 3rd level now, flushed and brave, begging the gardener to flee Taiqing with her before it was too late. And I played dumb with all the grace of a man being handed a live coal, because she'd come with news wrapped inside the romance. Taiqing had finally decided who to blame for the vanished spiritual vein, my spiritual vein. the one I'd quietly drunk dry, and they'd pinned it on some legendary demonic path monster called the Vile Spirit Elder, and the Jietian sect behind him, and to save face the #1 sect on the continent was about to go to war over a crime I'd committed by accident while leveling up. Vile Spirit Elder, I thought, whoever you are, what a good man. Taking the fall for me across an entire war. I should send flowers. I couldn't, of course, because as far as anyone knew, I was a terrified gardener whose junior sister wanted to elope, so I gently, kindly, told her no, and sent her home, and watched Taiqing march off to fight a ghost for my sins, and marveled all over again at how a sect this mighty could be this blind. Nascent souls and soul transformations everywhere you looked, maybe a hidden great ascension in the deep halls, and not one of them could find the actual culprit weeding radishes in their own back garden. Then Zhou Qing came again, and the Meng family reached back into my life the way it always did, with a gift and a hook. He brought a foundation pill and, more importantly, the advanced mind technique for the Vajra body, the real indestructible dragon body, sent down by the young master Wu Yan as a reward for my years of herb work. And studying it, I finally understood something about the Meng family that chilled me a little. They built hidden doors into the techniques they gave their servants, kill switches, a back door in the very art that made you strong, so that the master could always, if he chose, turn the servant off. Sweet. I fed the whole thing into the machine anyway, 5,000 years, and it evolved into the heavenly extreme profound yellow body, the complete indestructible dragon body, tripled my defense, and, in the process, quietly dissolved the Meng family's little kill switch like sugar in tea. Thanks for the gift. I improved it. I also removed the leash you sewed into it, but we don't need to mention that at the banquet, because there was a banquet. The Meng Patriarch's birthday, held in the Meng family's secret realm, and I was invited, bring premium spirit medicine, and, the invitation noted, the third Miss Shui Lan would be demonstrating her heavenly phoenix transformation. Shui Lan, the third Miss, the woman who, when I was a dying servant boy nobody would spend a copper on, said heal him. I'd spent 17 years carrying that debt around like a stone in my pocket, and here was the invitation that might finally let me set it down. Repay her once, I told myself, cleanly, and then the books are balanced, and I owe the world nothing. That's what I told myself. I spent another 2,000 years on the way, evolving the demonic shadow clone into the myriad manifestations of samsara, invisibility and a short teleport, the old shrink earth to an inch trick. Because if I was walking into a den of demonic path lineages wearing a servant's face, I wanted to be able to not be where anyone thought I was. My numbers by then were absurd. Great Ascension 2nd level, heaven rank root, an aura that withered armies, 30-odd thousand years still in the tank after all that spending, and one nagging problem I hadn't solved, which was that my strongest techniques leaned wood attribute, and if I kept feeding them, they'd start warping my 5 elements root into something narrower. I needed a proper 5 elements technique to balance it, and the outer sect library didn't have one, so I put the banquet to double duty. Repay a debt. And maybe, in a house that old and that rich, find the thing that would let me keep growing without breaking myself. And then, the night before I left, one more of them came sneaking through my garden after my dachshund fruit. Hulei, this one was called. Foundation 5th level, 80 years old, another purple light spy, and I made the honest mistake of assuming he was one of the Emperor's men and just handed him a fruit to make him go away. He took it, and then he tried to lure me into the forest to kill me and keep the secret, fire spirit orb, already glowing in his hand, and I sighed, and reached into his mind with the soul-seizing art, and took everything he knew before I ended him. Which turned out to be a windfall, because he knew the names of every purple light spy salted through the Taiqing sect. I filed the whole list, and I stood over one more body in my own forest, on the night before I went to repay the one clean debt of my life. And I said it out loud to nobody, the way I'd been saying it for years. I just want a farm, why do they keep coming? The forest didn't answer. The forest never does. But the banquet was waiting, and Shui Lan was waiting, and so, though I didn't know it yet, was the single worst choice anyone had ever asked me to make. Zhou Qing took me to the banquet by teleportation array, tens of thousands of li folded into a single step, and I will admit I coveted that array with my whole heart the instant I felt it work. Instant travel across a continent, no flying, no lifespan burned on the road. I wanted one. I filed the wanting away with everything else, and stepped out into the Meng family's mountain secret realm, a whole hidden world of pavilions and terraces that made my little vault look like a root cellar. I paid my respects to the young master, Wu Yan, Foundation 9th level, all smiles and empty promises, the kind of heir who mistakes being born rich for being interesting. Then I bribed Zhou Qing to cover my guard shift so I could go shopping for high-tier medicine seeds, because a debt is a debt, but a man still has to run his business. And that's when the banquet started showing me faces, one after another, each one a piece of a picture I didn't want to be in. Xu Bin was there, the humbled suitor, dragging his golden core mother behind him. He'd been gentled since the duel, worried sick about Li Qin, who was off raiding some demonic path stronghold in Dingzhou, and he snapped at me out of habit and then wandered off looking like a kicked dog. Simps, I thought, watching him go. Never get a good death. Then a face that wiped the amusement right off mine. Chu Feng, nascent soul 9th level, and I knew that name from Hulei's stolen memories. This was the mastermind, the purple light agent who'd climbed all the way into Taiqing's upper ranks, and he was here, among a whole quiet crowd of purple light spies, converging on this banquet like ants finding sugar. Something was happening at this party. Something the pavilion had been planning. And then, a great Ascension cultivator walked in, and the whole room bowed, and it turned out to be Sun Hong, Great Ascension 2nd level, the elder brother of Chen Hao, my book patron. Small continent. Chen Hao himself was there, and he saw me across the room, and before I could stop him he lit up and called out a warm, delighted greeting to the gardener he adored, and the entire banquet turned to stare at the sub-foundation servant, who was apparently on cheerful terms with a princess rank elder. So much for keeping my head down. Chen Hao, beaming, didn't care about the stares. He wanted his favorite author to keep writing. He wanted to sweep me up into the inner sect. He treated Lone Cloud Scroll like a national treasure in a servant's robe, which, to be fair, I was. My cover as a nobody took a real dent that night. My cover as a harmless nobody held, which was the part that mattered. Let them think the gardener was a secret literary genius. Genius with a pen is a lot less alarming than genius with a sword. But the real business of the night waited for me in a locked room, where Han Long, dressed now as a Taiqing sect elder with a nascent soul aura he'd bought back at terrible cost, pulled me aside and told me why the pavilion had come. The target was Shui Lan. The third miss, he explained, had something almost mythical. A perfect innate Dao body, and a pill refined from her essence blood would be heaven-defying, the kind of medicine that could extend even a great Ascension cultivator's lifespan. A treasure worth a war. The pavilion meant to take her. Not now. She was still Golden Core 9th level, 32 years old, 874 of lifespan, against a ceiling of nearly 9,000. They'd wait until she broke through to nascent soul, when the essence blood would be richest, and then they'd harvest her like a plant. And I stood there in that locked room and felt the two halves of my life grind against each other for the first time. Shui Lan had saved my life. She was the one clean debt, the one warm thing, the reason I was standing here at all. And Han Long had taught me everything I knew, had been, in his arrogant demonic way, something close to a father, and he was on the other side of this, and the whole pavilion behind him. Old debt against old debt. The woman who gave me my life against the man who gave me my power. And I did the coward's calculus, the only one I had, and landed where I always land, neutral. I'd stay out of it. I'd intervene only if one of them was about to actually die, and pray the choice never got sharpened to a point. It's a very reasonable position, neutrality. It lets you tell yourself you're wise instead of scared. It works, right up until the moment the world reaches out, takes your face in both hands, and makes you look at the thing you've been refusing to choose. I saw her before she saw me, and it happened the way these things always happen to me. Sideways, in the middle of getting in trouble for nothing. I'd wandered too close to Shui Lan's study, just to lay eyes on her, just to see the person the debt belonged to, and a steward called Elder Shu caught me loitering where a servant had no business, and ordered 50 lashes on the spot. 50, for standing in a hallway. And I was about to take them, because taking a beating is cheaper than revealing that the servant could turn the steward into a fine red mist, when a voice came down from a misty pavilion above and stopped the whip in the air. Hers. She saved me a second time without knowing it was the second time. She came down, and she was exactly what 17 years of memory had promised. And she looked at the servant she'd rescued, and didn't recognize the starving boy and the grown man. But she did recognize something else. She'd read my books. She knew, somehow, that the gardener in front of her was Lone Cloud Scroll, and her whole manner changed, warm and bright and a little delighted, praising Journey to the West to my face, while I stood there trying to remember how to be a person. She told me Sun Hong wanted to see me after the banquet, and then she pressed something into my hand. A one-time use kill jade talisman, a thing that could drop a golden core cultivator, and told me to keep it, for protection, because a famous author collects bounties the way a garden collects weeds. She gave me a weapon to keep me safe. She had no idea that the man she was protecting could have leveled her family's whole secret realm with a bad mood. She had no idea that the faction hunting her had already marked her, that her own eventual breakthrough was the starting gun on her harvest, that the servant she was being kind to was standing on both sides of the knife. She just saw someone she'd once decided was worth saving, and decided it again, freely, for nothing. And I took the talisman with both hands and a servant's bow, and inside, the balance sheet I'd carried for 17 years didn't get lighter, it got heavier. Because you can repay a debt of money, you cannot repay a person who keeps choosing to be good to you before you've done anything to earn it. That's not a debt, that's a haunting. The banquet itself was a parade of treasures pretending to be a birthday. Wu Yan showed off his indestructible dragon body, the real version of the art whose leash I'd quietly cut. And Shui Lan performed her heavenly phoenix transformation, and a phoenix the size of a hall unfurled out of her, gorgeous and radiant and, to every hungry eye in that room, a price tag. I watched the faces around me do the arithmetic of predators. An innate Tao body. A treasure like that, in a world like this, isn't a blessing. It's a crime you commit just by existing. And everyone at that table was quietly deciding they were entitled to the sentence. I have never wanted to burn a room down more, and I have burned down several. Afterward, Sun Hong and Chen Hao found me, and the Great Ascension Elder made me an offer that was half flattery and half leash. He wanted a book. Specifically, he wanted me to write a book with him as the hero. A dashing, unyielding, passionate protagonist, he specified, with more female confidants, please. And, he added with the wounded dignity of a man who'd read my other work, go easier on the hero for once. In exchange, a favor. And I, being me, turned his vanity into infrastructure. I named my price. 2 things. A second herb garden, in the inner sect this time, richer soil, higher tier stock. And a teleportation array of my own. The thing I'd coveted the second I felt it. He agreed, pending a good draft, and I went home and started writing the most shameless power fantasy of my career. A young genius clawing up through the ranks by sheer stubborn fury. And I called it Strength of Fighting, 3rd stage. It practically wrote itself. Turns out I know that story cold. I've been living a quieter version of it for 2 decades under a straw hat, so that was the trip. I went to repay one clean debt and came home owing more than I'd started with, carrying a kind woman's protective talisman in a pocket that also held the knowledge that my own teacher meant to butcher her, having traded a vain elder's ego for a second orchard and an instant road across the world. The neutrality still held. Barely. It held the way a dam holds, which is completely, right up until it doesn't, and I could already feel the water rising behind it, and I did the thing I always do when I can feel a choice coming that I don't want to make. I went home, and I put my head down, and I farmed. And I waited for the world to force my hand, the way it always does. The world forced my hand about a week later, and it did it, as usual, by hurting my plants. I came home to find a Tianyin sect hag named Wei Ting, soul transformation 3rd level, had frozen Yan Hao and the whole garden in place, torn 5 tier 4 spirit medicines out of my beds to fuel her alchemy, about a century of my lifespan yanked up by the roots, and was now demanding that my apprentices serve her. She'd already turned on Su Jia, who happened to be visiting, and was about to hurt her. So I did my whole clumsy hero routine, threw my useless gardener body between them, took a hit that flung me dramatically into the alchemy furnace, sold the whole thing, and then, from inside the smoke, let a shadow clone reach out and end Wei Ting with a single finger. Ding! 206 years. Meridians intact, heart stopped, the exact signature I'd used before, which was a mistake, because Yan Hao was watching. My bald reformed spy recognized the technique. His own second brother had used the demonic shadow clone. He knew that finger kill on sight. And he came to me, grave and worried, and warned me that there was a purple light spy hiding in the garden, someone using the pavilion's secret arts right under our noses, and we had to be careful. I agreed with him, deeply, sincerely. Yes, Yan Hao, a spy, in the garden, terrifying. We must watch out for this dangerous individual. It is definitely not the man you are talking to. 2 spies, still running the con on each other years later, except now one of them was warning the other to beware of himself, and I had to nod along with a straight face while my whole soul wanted to laugh. But Wei Ting left me one useful thing, a letter in her storage pouch, and it wiped the humor off my face fast. The Tianyin sect was also hunting Shui Lan, also waiting for her nascent soul breakthrough, also planning to harvest that innate Tao body for the same heaven-defying pill. So now it wasn't just Han Long and the Purple Light Pavilion circling the woman who'd saved my life. It was 2 great demonic factions, converging on the same kind, oblivious girl, and my careful little neutrality was starting to look less like wisdom and more like a man standing very still in the middle of a road, pretending the wagons aren't coming. Meanwhile, the sect's war on the innocent vile spirit elder ground on, the law enforcement hall going through the motions of investigating the spiritual vein I'd drained, everyone chasing a monster I'd invented by accident. Vile spirit elder, I toasted him quietly. What a good man, still taking my fall. And I used the noise as cover to do what I do best. Disappear underground and get stronger. I took 10,000 years and fed my wood attribute scripture, and it finally evolved into the thing I'd been reaching for, the Qinglian Hunyuan scripture, the Azure Lotus, and with it a divine ability that changed what I was. Azure Sea Green Lotus, control of all the heaven and earth chi within 100 li. I could reach into the air around an enemy and simply take the world away from him, cut him off from the very energy he breathed to fight. I cultivated it down on the main branch of the spiritual vein itself, where the chi ran so thick that breakthroughs cost a fraction of the usual lifespan, and I rode that discount all the way up to Great Ascension 9th level. And there, at the very top of Great Ascension, one wall from a realm most cultivators die of old age still dreaming about, I found something new sitting in my dantian, a dot. Bean-sized, golden, quiet, and absolutely radiant with the sense of a door. The key to the next realm, whatever the next realm was called. I looked at that little golden seed glowing at the center of me and understood that I was standing at the edge of something the whole Taiqing sect, elders and sect master and hidden great ascensions and all, had never reached, and probably never would. A servant. With a hoe. Who liked plants. One step from a realm out of legend, with a divine beast for a dog and an emperor for an uncle and a phoenix-blooded woman's protective talisman in his pocket, and 2 demonic sects and a whole faceless future all closing in at once. I probably should have felt powerful. What I mostly felt was tired, and watched, and one bad day away from a choice I'd been dodging for 17 years. So I did the only sensible thing. I climbed out of the ground, brushed the dirt off, went back to my garden, and got ready for whatever came up the path next. Something always did. The choice came for me 1,000 li away, in the shape of a great Ascension tier battle lighting up the horizon, and I knew without looking what it was. Shuilan's breakthrough. The harvest, beginning. Both factions moving on her at last. And I found my compromise, the coward's masterpiece. I flew in hidden, faster than anyone there could track, and I did not pick a side. Instead, I reached into both of them, into Hanlong and into Shuilan, and I planted the same thing in each, a seed of suspended golden light that would catch their divine souls at the edge of death and hold them there, keep them from truly dying no matter who won. Then I left. The battle raged for a full day. Both sides bled, both sides withdrew, and my 2 safeguards sat quietly inside the 2 people I refused to choose between. Insurance against a grief I couldn't face. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't even really neutrality. It was a man who loved 2 people on opposite sides of a knife, buying himself the right to keep them both, and calling it wisdom because the truth was harder. Yan Hao, around then, finally told me his own secret, the one under the spy. He'd been a true genius once, doomed to die young, until a shabby old fortune-teller robbed him, shaved his head, and left him with something called the Mystic Origin Skill, an art that transforms a man every 33 years, 9 rebirths across a life, and each rebirth rewrites his life source, resets the ceiling on his very lifespan, heaven-defying. It explained a mystery I'd been chewing on, how Hanlong's maximum lifespan had climbed from 300 to 2,000. When the ceiling is supposed to be a wall you cannot move. My own system confirmed the terrible elegance of it. To change your destiny is to be reborn, and rebirth resets the limit. I learned the technique, of course, added it to the pile. And I noted, with the small cold feeling I was getting used to, that its creator was beyond great ascension, beyond anything I'd met, and had nothing to do with the Purple Light Pavilion. This continent had depths under its depths. I was a very big fish who was starting to suspect the pond was actually an ocean. Han Long came back from the raid half dead and furious. The essence blood harvest had failed, the Meng family and Taiqing both mysteriously forewarned, and he looked at me with the beginnings of a suspicion I deflected by quoting his own old lectures back at him until he got too annoyed to keep accusing me. But he hadn't come away empty. He'd taken one of the Meng family's 2 precious beads, a thing humming with some immortal-related secret, sealed so tight it would take an incantation, or a force beyond soul transformation to crack. With an innate Dao body and this bead, he told me, the Meng family could have become a new holy land. Then he left the bead box in my keeping, because of course he did, because everyone's always leaving their most dangerous treasures with the harmless gardener, and I took it down to my vault and did the thing I do, pressed my divine sense against the seal and forced it, and a technique poured out into me, reversing the heavenly gang, not a fighting art. Something stranger, something to do with time and fate and looking at what had already happened. I filed it with all the rest, and tried not to think about what a man could do with an art called reversing the heavens, and failed, and thought about it constantly. That was the shape of those years. Every visitor a treasure, every treasure a hook, every hook attached to a war I kept swearing I wasn't part of. And through all of it the Emperor kept pulling me deeper into his orbit, and the Emperor's orbit, it was becoming very clear, was heading somewhere dark. The Emperor's men came for me in the dead of winter. Fang Zhang, a blunt, principled ex-military type, Golden Core 9th level, and a quiet medicine man named Xiao Bing, and they escorted me out to Baoyue Valley, the Emperor's private garden, 2,000 li from anywhere, Tier 4 and Tier 5 stock growing wild, a place he used to raise both spirit medicine and, quietly, geniuses. I cleared the weed chi choking the place myself, pocketed the lifespan, subdued a pair of troublemaking baboons, and named them Shuk and Beta, and started calling grim, upright Fang Zheng, Iron Sentinel, after a demon in my own monkey book, which he did not appreciate and could not stop. Fang Zheng was the kind of man you couldn't bribe with treasure and couldn't budge with rank, and I broke him in one afternoon by handing him a copy of Investiture of the Gods. He stayed up all night reading it. Then he came to me at dawn, stone-faced, demanding the sequel, and when I didn't have one fast enough, he took to lurking near my quarters like a starving man outside a kitchen. The scourge of the border, the Emperor's unbreakable blade, reduced to nagging a gardener for the next chapter. I have brought low a great many enemies in my life. I am proudest, honestly, of Iron Sentinel. To justify hanging around all these gardens, I finally faked a public breakthrough, let Ren Yi the gardener reach Foundation establishment out in the open, a nice small believable step up that explained nothing and reassured everyone. My old friend Xiao Jun had been transferred out of the executive hall by then, replaced by some arrogant new hall master, and it was Chen Hao, filling in, who publicly saved me when a fat bullying cultivator nearly shoved me down and waved me through as an exempt disciple free to live in my garden. And Chen Hao, beaming, dropped the number on me that finally made me understand the size of the disguise I'd built by accident. My books were famous across 7 imperial dynasties now. 7. The sect elders wanted me to write a novel glorifying Taiqing itself, for a reward that would make a golden core weep. Chen Hao also had personal requests, and this is where it gets funny, because the great elder's requests were petty as a schoolboy's. He bribed me with top-grade spirit stones and pills and array diagrams to write him into the book as the dashing protagonist, and to give that protagonist a son named Ye Fan who idolized him. Why the son? Because Chen Hao's old love rival, a Ye, had stolen his beloved, and the child of that marriage, the actual Ye Fan, had awakened the Ye family's dragon elephant divine body, become the divine elephant sect's first genius in centuries, beaten a golden core 5th level while still at Foundation 9th, and was now coming to visit Taiqing to exchange pointers, which is the polite phrase for coming to slap the local juniors around. Chen Hao wanted his rival's prodigy immortalized as his own fictional son. Pettiness at the scale of legend. I agreed, insisted on a homophone name so nobody could sue me over it, and started drafting, and made a mental note that a golden core prodigy with a slapping habit was headed straight for my garden and my apprentices. I also, out of pure mischief, brought Feng Zheng the illustrated edition of Strange Tales, the trashy ghost romance stuff, and Iron Sentinel put down Investiture of the Gods and never picked it back up. There is no man so disciplined that the right terrible book can't ruin him. It's a comfort, honestly. It means everyone's human under there somewhere, even the Emperor's sword. Spring Festival came around again, and I cooked. Badly, as is tradition. And everyone ate it anyway, as is also tradition. Sujia came, and slipped me a Tier 5 seed as a breakthrough gift, which I once again managed to misread as something more, and the garden was warm and loud and full of my rejects for one more night. But there was a shadow on it this year. Wang Kang wasn't there. He'd gone and attached himself to an outer elder of the law enforcement faction, and the power struggle between the sect master and the law enforcement elder was no longer background gossip. A new demon suppression division had appeared in all 4 outer cities, outranking the old halls, and the mountain was choosing sides. And choosing sides in a place full of immortals tends to end in a lot of funerals. Sun Hong finally made good on the second garden too. Chen Hao brought me the token, and with it the outline of the book they wanted, which was the most shameless thing I'd ever been asked to write. Sun Hong as the invincible protagonist ascending to glory, the suppressed sects rebelling, Chen Hao's character betrayed and murdered by his own fiancée, with his soul stuffed in a ring, then awakened by his long-lost son, father and son revenge, Taiqing restored to number 1. It was, beat for beat, the exact power fantasy every kid on the continent was starving for, and I wrote it in my sleep because I'd read 10,000 versions of it in another life. The new garden itself was 3 times the size of my old one, richer soil, thicker chi, and it came with the thing I'd truly wanted, teleport array materials and blueprints. I built the array myself, linked the outer garden to the inner one, and named the new place King's Canyon, which made Rui Lan nervous, because King might offend the Emperor. I told him not to worry. The current Emperor's my uncle. The next one's my buddy Bai Fan. If anyone in this dynasty gets to name a garden after a throne, it's the gardener who's on a first-name basis with 2 of them. 3 gardens now. 3 orchards of years, harvest rolling in from all of them. My tank climbing into numbers I'd stopped being able to feel. And then Ye Fan arrived, and gave me the single most reliable source of comedy I'd have for years. He found Dongkai first, my apprentice, practicing the fierce blade work he'd picked up off Feng Zheng, and he did the genius thing. Walked up all arrogance and asked who taught him, and then proceeded to beat Dongkai into the dirt on a daily basis for sport. So I stepped in, the humble foundation gardener, and offered a friendly no spiritual power spar. And I took a tree branch, and I one-shot the divine elephant sect's first genius in centuries, with a snap of a Zhou family sword form, and watched his whole worldview crack down the middle. Here's the beautiful part. He didn't get angry. He got obsessed. Ye Fan was a pure martial fanatic, the rare kind who loves losing to someone better more than winning against someone worse, and getting flattened by a talentless gardener was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. So he kept coming back. Once a month, like clockwork, a golden core prodigy would show up at my garden, get beaten, this time in 3 moves, next time in 6, and then, and this is the part that made my apprentices lose their minds, He'd leave behind a pile of high-tier spirit medicine as compensation and swear, fist raised, "I will definitely come back." And come back he did, monthly, to be defeated and to pay for the privilege, until the entire garden was convinced there was a wealthy golden core lunatic who traveled across the continent specifically to lose fights to Master Feng and tip generously afterward. I did not correct them. It was, financially and comedically, the best arrangement I'd ever stumbled into. I did have to be a little careful because I'd started slipping the Yuan-Tu 6 swords into our spars, and Guangzi noticed his forbidden family art in my hands and gave me a look, and I told him all sword paths lead to the same place, which is true, and also exactly the kind of thing a man says when he's been caught and would like to move on. And then, in the middle of the monthly farce, Bai Fan came home, golden core now, back from his legacy trial in one piece, older around the eyes. And he brought his troubles with him, and his father's, and the whole slow-motion collapse of the Azure Fen royal family walked in the gate right behind my grinning apprentice, wearing the face of an old friend. Bai Fan and I sat up half the night over tea, the way old friends do when one of them has been somewhere that changed him. He told me about the trial, and then he told me the darker story, the one from the road. He'd saved an old woman's family from a local noble house, and the noble house had answered by slaughtering them anyway, so Bai Fan had burned the murderers out, and gotten himself framed and hunted for it. The local prefect turning the whole region against him because the prefect had married into that same rotten clan. It ate at him. He'd done the right thing and become the villain of the story. What he didn't know, and what I never told him, was that the prefect's entire clan had quietly ceased to exist a while later, root and branch, and that the man who erased them had done it from behind a straw hat without leaving a fingerprint. Some gifts you give a friend without ever letting him know he received them. He asked me the question that was really eating him. What's the point of cultivating? What's it all for, if getting stronger just means you become the thing you were fighting? And I gave him the only answer I've ever trusted. Don't ask what everyone else says the point is. Ask what you want. Everything else is just other people's fear wearing your face. He didn't fully understand it yet. He would. Ye Fan came for his monthly beating one last time before leaving for his sect, lost as ever, lamenting that if only my talent could catch up, we could someday fight all out, the way a man mourns a duel he'll never get. And on his way out the door he stopped being funny for exactly one sentence. "Be careful," he told me. "Many people in the Taiqing sect are going to die soon." Then he was gone, and I stood there holding a warning from a martial idiot who understood the future better than any of the elders, and I filed it with a cold little chill, because Ye Fan didn't lie, and Ye Fan didn't scare, and Ye Fan was scared. He was right, of course. The coup came fast. A demon suppression envoy summoned all the elders, unrolled a scroll, and announced that the sect master had died of chi deviation, which is the traditional way of saying he'd been murdered by whoever was reading the scroll. The law enforcement elder, Huo Li, had seized the seat, and the purge began, rival factions vanishing overnight, and in the wreckage of it, someone got dumped at my inner sect garden as a common laborer, an old man, gray and stooped and reeking of ruin, and I read his numbers and nearly dropped my tea. The former sect master himself, Gu Yuan, the man who used to run the whole mountain, now crippled down to chi refining, cultivation shattered, 3,000 years of sealing gone dark, dumped on the gardener, because Sun Hong didn't know where else to hide a deposed king. Chen Hao traded me a 7th-tier spirit tree sapling for taking the old wreck in, and just like that I had an ex-sect master weeding my radishes and calling himself Elder Yue, and I had no idea yet that I'd just adopted the most important stray of my life. Meanwhile, the Emperor's own troubles were metastasizing, and here's the cosmic joke of it. They were my fault. My book, Investiture of the Gods, with its tyrant Lord Gao, had given the Emperor an offhand line about strength that his enemies twisted into propaganda, whispering through the Meng family ministers that Qing Zhen meant to become the second Lord Gao, a tyrant reborn. There was a real war of words tearing at his throne, and it had started in a book written by the servant tending his garden. Fang Zheng, not knowing he was talking to the author, actually suggested burning every copy and arresting the writer, and I had to sit there, the writer, and nod thoughtfully at the wisdom of book burning while sweating through my robe. Elder Yue, dying by inches from his old injuries, kept cryptically offering to make me the next sect master, and I kept playing deaf, and Sun Hong's nephew Feng Jun arrived to heal him, a golden core medic who happened to also be a genuinely good writer of real experiences and wanted lessons from Lone Cloud Scroll. Feng Jun also let slip a piece of horror I filed away hard. There existed a Ling beast fruit, an immortal remnant that turned whoever ate it into a mindless spirit beast under the full moon, permanently if you overdid it. And that Bai Fan, my Bai Fan, had unknowingly eaten one, because the fruit treasures he'd traded me years ago had come off a dead loose cultivator's corpse. My best friend was carrying a curse in his veins and thought it was a blessing, and neither of us knew yet how much that was going to matter. The mountain was tilting toward catastrophe. Ye Fan had promised me that. And I, 3 gardens rich and 1 realm from legend, did what I always do at the edge of a disaster I can feel coming. I kept my head down, kept my people close, and waited for the specific shape the ruin would take. It was going to be bad. I just didn't know yet that it was going to ask me, out loud, to choose between my cover and the lives of everyone I'd ever adopted. It started, the way it always does with me, with somebody poisoning my plants. Yan Hao's crippled one-armed brother, Huo Ren, working with a pharmacy-owning spy named Chen Wen, poisoned my spirit medicine fields. The whole scheme aimed at getting the garden folk expelled, so they could finally grab Yan Hao. I came home to withered beds and saw red, warded the whole garden top to bottom, and started paying much closer attention to the quiet war being fought over my bald pharmacist. But the poisoning was small. The thing behind everything, the shadow the whole mountain was bracing against, had a name I kept hearing in lowered voices: the Barren Abyss, the Huangyuan Calamity. And I finally got the full story of it, secondhand, from an elder briefing another. The last time the Barren Abyss opened, it had killed 2/3 of everything on the Tianhai continent and destroyed 5 of the 9 imperial dynasties. Taiqing had survived only because of one man, the founder, the ancestral master, who'd held the horror back with a sword, whose blood, the legend said, stained 300 million li of yellow sand. And that man was long gone, and the abyss was stirring again, and the sect that had leaned on his memory for 3,000 years suddenly had no one to hold the line. That's the kind of thing that makes a proud old sect do desperate, ugly math. The bidding war for my time got absurd around then. A Xuantian sect grand elder named Liang Shu, Great Ascension 9th level, came to commission a Xuantian glorifying book, because my novels had visibly doubled Taiqing's recruiting numbers and everyone wanted their own. He ended up debating literature with me instead, and I met him with 2 lifetimes of opinions about my own monkey book, and he got so impressed he tried to make me his true disciple on the spot, offered me heaven and earth treasures to raise my talent, the whole seduction. I turned him down. I have a heaven rank root I bought myself and a garden I love, and no interest whatsoever in becoming a Great Ascension Elder's prize student. He did not take it gracefully. He threw Feng Jun out a door, got a little violent, and left insulted, and Su Jia, who by now was half living at my garden and had convinced herself my endless book writing was actually me producing filth, ran off to fetch Bai Fan to save me from my own depravity. I have been accused of many things. Corrupting the youth with a suspiciously long manuscript was a new one. The mountain kept tightening. Su Cheng, the purple light mastermind now fully embedded as a Taiqing elder, betrayed Huo Ren and crippled him for real, and Huo Ren crawled off to report to his father, the Dark Moon Fiend King, who decided the time had come to stop hiding and step out of the shadows himself. Bai Fan, meanwhile, discovered he could now transform into a great winged flying tiger, and being Bai Fan, he decided this was the power of the Warrior of Light from my own book, Taiqing Immortal Emperor, and I did not have the heart to tell him it was actually the Ling Beast fruit curse in his veins. So I just let my best friend believe he'd become a hero of light because he read a story I wrote. Some lies are cruel. That one was a kindness, and I'd tell it again. Then the sect made its move, and I understood what Ye Fan had been warning me about. Taiqing handed out a free technique to every outer sect disciple, a powerful art, generous, unprecedented, and it was, underneath, a blood sacrifice container, a way to turn 100,000 disciples into fuel cells. And they built 4 altars, one in each of the 4 outer cities, a single enormous power-gathering formation, dressed up as a defense against the coming calamity. My disciples got their free technique. My disciples got herded, with everyone else, toward the altars. And I looked at that formation with eyes that had learned the shape of a lie a long time ago, and I saw exactly what it was, and my blood went cold. It wasn't a shield, it was a furnace. And every low-talent nobody in the outer sect, every reject like the ones I'd spent 20 years adopting, was being walked cheerfully toward the fire, singing about how the sect was going to protect them. Elder Yue, weeding beside me, told me the last piece of the founder's legend, the true weight of it. 1 man, 1 sword, 300 million li of blood, and then he'd left his personal blade behind and vanished, and the sect had been living off that loan ever since. And I thought about a furnace, built to burn 100,000 of the powerless to relight a dead man's sword, and I felt the old neutrality, the one I'd hidden behind my whole life, start to crack right down the middle. Because you can stay neutral about kings and factions and wars. You can tell yourself it's not your fight, but they were about to burn my kids. Elder Yue kept pushing me, in his cryptic dying way, to try the founder's own technique, the break and rebuild art that nobody but the founder had ever survived. I kept saying no, and then the emperor summoned me to Baoyue Valley, and while I was walking into that summons, back at the outer sect the furnace was being lit. They herded them all into Huangcheng, the outer city, toward the great altar. Wang Kong, fanatical and loyal to the wrong people, led my own garden folk in. And Su Jia, who had a sharper nose for wrong than the whole demon suppression division put together, felt what the altar really was under her feet, felt the blood sacrifice hum of it, and started to fight her way back out. At Baoyue Valley, the emperor sat me down and told me the truth plainly, the way powerful men tell you a horror when they've already decided it's necessary. Taiqing was going to sacrifice the entire outer sect, hundreds of thousands of them, feed them all into the altar to awaken the founder's sword against the barren abyss. He told me which of my people were on the safe list: Baifan, Li Qin, Feng Jun, Elder Yu, a handful, and he told me the rest weren't. And he said the thing that men like him always say, the sentence that has justified every atrocity since the beginning of the world. The individual makes way for the collective. Cold and reasonable, and evil in the specific way that only reasonable things can be. And back at the altar, it was already happening. An elder named Wu Ji, a puppet with Liang Shu's strings on him, stood at the center of it and turned the whole formation on, mind-controlled the 100,000 into chanting their willing assistance to his glorious ascension, and began to drain them, to kill them, life by life, to wake a dead man's blade. My disciples were in that crowd. Sujia and Rilan were fighting the demon suppression guards to escape, and Wang Kang, out of his mind with fanatic loyalty, was stopping them, and they were being dragged toward the altar to burn. Guangzi threw himself at Wuju with the Yuan-Tu 6 swords and got swatted out of the air like a fly, and I was 2,000 li away, sitting across a low table from the emperor of the Azure Fen dynasty, practicing calligraphy. I want you to sit with the picture, because it's the truest one I have of who I am. Not a hero charging in with a battle cry, a gardener in a borrowed study, grinding ink, making small talk with a sovereign, while everyone he loves is walked toward a fire a province away. That's the cost of the mask. The mask is why I was still breathing. And the mask was about to get 100,000 people killed, my kids first among them, if I kept wearing it 1 minute longer. So I made the decision I'd been dodging my whole life. Quietly, without a flicker crossing my face, still chatting with the emperor, still moving my brush across the paper, I decided, I will change their fate. I didn't stand up. I didn't reveal a thing. I kept painting. But my sword, my real sword, the one I could move with a thought across any distance, lifted off from where it hung a province away, and I began to guide it, not with my hand, with my brush. Every stroke of ink a command written into steel 2,000 li off. To the emperor across the table, it looked like a gardener idly practicing his characters, maybe a little distracted, nothing more. On the paper I was writing calligraphy. In Huangcheng, in the same motions, I was riding a blade through the air, toward the altar, toward my kids. Toward the exact instant, a mind-controlled elder was about to bring his killing power down on the boy who'd bled on my doorstep more times than I could count. Baifan had gotten there. Of course he had. He always shows up. He'd torn through the barrier and put himself between Wu Ji and the crowd, and his golden core and his flying tiger and his old ancestors' borrowed power weren't going to be enough. Not against what Wu Ji really was, and his 3/Azure Fen technique shattered against the elder like a wave on a cliff, and the killing blow came down, and my sword got there first. It slid into the path of that blow, out of nowhere, out of nothing, a plain steel longsword arriving like a verdict, and it stopped an elder's execution stroke dead in the air, a province from the hand that guided it. And a voice, mine, carried on the steel, spoke into that frozen moment for everyone at the altar to hear. Draw your sword, I told Baifan, and let me see your righteous path. Baifan drew his sword, and I poured power into him through mine, quietly, invisibly, a river of it disguised as his own. And the boy who'd just been swatted aside stood up glowing with a strength that wasn't quite his, and swung at the one thing the whole sect had built this obscene furnace to awaken, the founder's divine sword. The ancestral master's blade, the holy relic the sacrifice of 100,000 lives, was meant to bring roaring back. He shattered it. One stroke, and the 3,000-year-old sacred sword of the Taiqing sect broke like a clay pot. And here's where the whole ghastly thing turned into the best joke I have ever personally witnessed. Because when that sword broke, it spilled its secret, and the secret was a blood message the founder had left inside it, and the message, in essence, read, "It's just my old memento, there's no magic in it, stop overthinking it. 3,000 years. 3,000 years the Taiqing sect had venerated a plain sentimental keepsake as a world-saving relic, had bled itself building altars to awaken it, had walked 100,000 people toward a fire to relight a blade that was, and had always been, exactly as ordinary as it looked. That's why no one had ever been able to awaken it. There was nothing to awaken. The great mystery of the age was a dead man's ordinary sword that everyone was too proud to believe was ordinary. I nearly laughed out loud across the table from the emperor. A furnace built on a misunderstanding. The whole horror, powered by no one wanting to admit the emperor had no clothes and the founder had no magic sword. The altar's power collapsed with the lie. My blade blew Wuji apart before he could recover, and the 100,000 stopped being fuel and started, groggily, being people again. My kids were alive. Suja, Rilan, all of them, alive. Then it got complicated, the way it always does when I try to do one clean thing. Another old man swept in, Yang Hu, whisk in hand, a serious power moving to contain the chaos. And at the worst possible moment, the emperor, watching me paint, leaned over to brag about how magnificent his son Bai Fan had just been, and jostled my arm. My brush skipped. And 2,000 li away my sword, still under the command of that brushstroke, went skipping too, flung wide off its path, hurtling across Huangcheng, and straight into the middle of a battle I hadn't even known was happening, where Wenjun and Yanhao's father, the Dark Moon Fiend King himself, under his true name, were already tearing at each other. Yang Hu chased my runaway sword into it, and suddenly there was a three-way battle between Dao integration monsters ripping the landscape apart. A 10-day war that flattened mountains. All of it kicked off because an emperor got proud of his kid and bumped a gardener's elbow. I did the only responsible thing. I reached into the wreckage with the Samsara art and snatched the unconscious Yan Hao out of the crossfire before anyone's father could kill him, and I let my poor sword go, and I sat there very calmly finishing my calligraphy, while a proud emperor complimented my brushwork, and, a province away, 3 of the strongest beings on the continent demolished each other over a misunderstanding I'd caused twice over. "Do you draw a sword this well?" the emperor asked, admiring my characters. I told him I dabbled. It's the most honest lie I've ever told. When the dust settled over the following days, the wreckage reshaped the whole mountain. The blood sacrifice had failed, and worse, the story of it, a sect murdering its own by the 100,000, got out to the whole continent, whispered everywhere by an anonymous Zhou soul transformation, who was, I was fairly sure, the emperor himself playing a longer game. Factions started circling Taiqing like sharks scenting weakness in the water, poaching its disciples, questioning its right to be number one. Bai Fan came out of it a hero, the disciple who'd shattered the false relic and stood against the sacrifice, his fame rocketing past even Xuelan's, exactly as I'd told him it would years ago. He'll become famous, I'd said. He had. And Huolia's grip broke, and when it broke, Yang Hu rose out of the chaos as the new sect master of the Taiqing sect, whisk and all, having chased my runaway blade straight into a promotion. And me? I finished my painting. I went home. I checked on my kids, and my plants, and my quietly breathing bald spy, and I told absolutely no one that the whole apocalypse had turned on a gardener writing calligraphy and a founder's very funny sense of humor. The mask held. It always held. But something had shifted in me at that altar, and I could feel it, and I didn't have a word for it yet. I'd spent 20 years telling myself I only wanted to farm, and I just moved heaven and a sword across a province to keep 100,000 strangers from burning. Turns out the coward had a line after all. Turns out I'd had it the whole time, and just never let anyone walk up to it before. When the new sect master, Yang Hu, came to commission a damage control book and offered me any request I wanted, everyone in the room expected me to ask for true disciple status, real power, a seat at the table. I asked for land, 100 li of the outer sect, to farm. Yang Hu stared at me like I'd asked to be paid in radishes, and I let him stare, because the more baffling my wants looked, the safer I stayed. Just a gardener. Just wants more garden. Nothing to see here. But the thing that came out of that meeting mattered more than land. Elder Yue was in the room, listening, the deposed sect master weeding in the corner, while the new one handed out favors, and he watched a nobody gardener turn down power to protect a sect full of people who'd never done anything for him, and something reignited in the old wreck. He'd been dying quietly, given up. And now, privately, he made himself a promise I overheard. He would reform Taiqing, he would set it right, and he'd make me sect master to do it. I didn't want the job, but I'd accidentally given a broken old king a reason to live, and that turns out to matter later more than any 100 li of dirt. Then Sun Hong came with a warning wrapped in a riddle. The Huangyuan calamity, he said, had ended ahead of schedule, which made no sense, until it did. The plan to seal the barren abyss was already in motion, faster than anyone had planned, and it needed a very specific key. Feng Jun spelled it out when he came to borrow Yan Hao. Wenjun, the last crown prince of a dynasty the abyss had already destroyed once. The #1 genius who'd survived the last calamity, carrying 687 million dead countrymen on his conscience, had found an ancient immortal secret realm with a diagram to seal the barren abyss permanently, but the seal needed 5 living keys, 5 destiny symbols: azure dragon, vermilion bird, white tiger, black tortoise, qilin. 5 people born to specific fates, and my bald reformed spy, Yan Hao, was one of them, the black tortoise. The righteous and demonic paths had actually signed a truce to make this happen. That's how bad the abyss was. Everyone who could kill each other had agreed not to, just long enough to try to shut the door at the bottom of the world. I planted a 7th-tier Qingling tree in King's Canyon around then, a tree whose leaf tea wards off the heart demon, because I could feel the stakes rising and I wanted my people to have something in their cup that kept their minds clear. Small things. A gardener's kind of preparation. And I sent Yan Hao off toward the abyss with Feng Jun, the two of them bonding instantly over the discovery that they'd both been robbed by the exact same shabby old man years ago, which is apparently a whole club on this continent. Yan Hao left me a message for his father, the demon lord who'd once tried to sacrifice him. Tell him, he said, that his son is not a good for nothing. Then he was gone, off to be one of 5 keys holding back the end of the world. My bald houseplant, the best decision I ever made. My pets left me around the same time, and that one caught me off guard with how much it stung. I went down to the vault, and Ink Jade Qilin and Dragon Sparrow were both gone, run off toward the eastern wilderness to see the world. I chased them down, and my divine beast dog, 4th tier now and fierce, looked me in the eye, and told me it wasn't trash that needed protecting. It wanted to live, out there, on its own terms. And what could I say to that? It was my own philosophy handed back to me by a creature I'd raised. So I let them both go, tagged them with life-saving chi, so I'd know if they were ever truly in danger, and watched my thieving bird and my affectionate apocalypse fly off into the sunrise, and felt, for a beast and a bird, a startling amount of loss. The garden was quieter after. I don't recommend raising things you'll have to let leave. I don't recommend anything else either. And then, alone, on the rich main branch of the spiritual vein where breakthroughs come cheap, I crossed the last wall. 15,000 years, poured in, up through the peak of Tao integration and over the edge into the true spirit realm. First level, the realm the elders and the sect master and the whole proud mountain had never touched. The tier that in this whole vast dynasty you could count the holders of on your fingers. The tribulation for it was brutal, a whiteboard crossing with no relics and no protectors. Exactly the way I'd done every breakthrough of my life, alone and paying full price. But it took. A servant with a cracked hoe was now a true spirit realm cultivator, one of the handful of genuinely world-shaping beings alive, hiding it under a straw hat, in a garden, from everyone. Yan Hao's letter arrived the same week, and it wiped the quiet satisfaction right off my face. The abyss had opened early, the plan had moved up, and the 5 keys, my bald houseplant among them, had just been pulled down into the worst place in the world ahead of schedule, before anyone was ready. 2 smaller things happened before I could think about the abyss, and both of them turned out to weigh more than they looked. First, someone started stealing the low-tier spirit medicine out of King's Canyon, only the cheap stuff, which was the strange part. I used the reversing the heavenly gang art to look back at what had already happened, unspooled the theft like a scroll, and there was Elder Yue, sneaking my radishes, recovering fast now, secretly cultivating the founder's brutal technique back up to golden core. I played the guilt card, the poor gardener who'll be punished if the sect finds the medicine short, and the old man was so mortified he swore to guard the garden personally, and then went and stole from other people's gardens instead, so he wouldn't have to steal from mine. A deposed sect master, robbing the neighbors to spare the feelings of the servant who took him in. I've met a lot of powerful people. He's one of the few I'd call good, underneath all the ruin. Second, and this one didn't have a joke in it, Han Long died. My grandmaster, my arrogant demonic teacher, killed in the endless infighting of the Purple Light Pavilion, and a one-armed spy brought me his farewell letter and a recording stone. And the great demonic pathmaster, the man who taught me alchemy and corpsecraft and shadow arts thinking he was raising a weapon, spent his last message on one thing. Not power, not revenge. His son. That mystery pill he'd spent years refining in my vault, the one that had cost him his shot at nascent soul, had always been for a boy named Han Yu, 12 years old, hidden near Taiqing with a guardian, a child with a sword heart already at 12, and a lifespan ceiling that marked him a genius. Look after him, the letter asked. And here's the part that told me who Han Long really was, under all the arrogance. His last instruction wasn't, take my son as a disciple, avenge me, make him strong. It was, let the boy live a normal life. No revenge. Just let him be a person. I went to see the kid. And Han Yu, 12 years old, sharp as his father and stubborn as a mule, kowtowed until his forehead bled, begging me to make him my disciple, and when I refused, honoring Han Long's wish for a normal life, the little maniac started staging fake emergencies, throwing himself into staged dangers so I'd have to come rescue him and, he hoped, be shamed into teaching him. I held out longer than any reasonable man would. Then I gave in, the way I always give in to the stubborn ones, and instead of formal discipleship, I taught him 3 techniques, the Samsara art, the Wood Origin Scripture, and Azure Fen's sword form, and made him swear to say he'd taught himself. Because a boy carrying his dead father's talent and his dead father's enemies needed to be strong more than he needed to be safe, and Han Long, wherever he'd gone, would understand. I was collecting orphans again. I've never once decided to, it just keeps happening, and I've stopped pretending it's an accident. And then Yan Hao's life tag, the chi thread I'd tied to him, flared. The abyss was going wrong. Down there, at the bottom of the world, it was already a slaughter. Wen Jun's team, 30-odd of the strongest young talents on the continent, Yan Hao and Feng Jun, and the other destiny holders among them, had been sucked into the barren abyss the instant the gate opened early, before the seal was ready. Shape-shifting, soul-eating things moved in that dark and killed them one by one, wearing the faces of the friends they'd just eaten. Wen Jun led them anyway, a crowned prince walking back into the pit that had swallowed his entire dynasty, carrying 600 million ghosts and a diagram that might close the door if enough of them lived long enough to draw it. On my way to the edge of that horror, I ran into something new, and filed it with a chill. An ascension cultivator, a woman, an empress by the weight of her, 568 years old, with a lifespan over 5,000, and she was from somewhere else entirely, another world, and she looked around at the Tianhai continent, at my whole world, the sects and dynasties and the abyss and all of it, and she thought she'd arrived in the immortal realm. She thought this was heaven. She was scouting it, measuring it, the way a conqueror measures a country she means to take. I didn't understand yet what she was, or what it meant that a being who mistook my entire world for a stepping stone was walking around loose in it. I just felt the cold, the specific cold I'd been feeling more and more, the one that says the pond is an ocean and you have not yet seen the bottom. But that was tomorrow's fear. Today's was a bald man I loved, dying in the dark at the bottom of the world, and a seal that wasn't going to hold, and a sword I could throw across any distance if I could only decide, one more time, to stop being a gardener for exactly as long as it took to save him. The thing at the bottom of the barren abyss was the same thing the founder had pinned 3,000 years ago. 100 meters of it, 8-eyed, tentacled, goat-horned. The horror that had eaten Wen Jun's entire dynasty and half the continent with it. And it was awake, and it was tearing the 5-element seal formation apart from the inside faster than 5 exhausted keys could hold it together. Wen Jun did what a crown prince with 687 million ghosts does at the end. He self-destructed. Burned his whole self, all his power, and all his years, in one detonation, aimed at shoving the monster back down, and he did it with a sentence I'm not going to forget. 687 million souls of the Ming dynasty, he said. I'm taking them back. And it wasn't enough. It's never enough, when it's just one man and a mountain of grief against the actual end of the world. The seal cracked wider, the monster came half out, and the 5 keys, Yan Hao among them, were about to be nothing but a footnote in the second death of everything. I threw a sword. Not my own, as it happens. Poor Lin Bo's sword, the one I'd borrowed off my apprentice, because the man who was about to save the continent didn't even have his own blade on him. He had a gardener's spare. I threw it from where I stood, a plain steel longsword crossing the impossible distance into the pit at the bottom of the world, and it went in exactly where the founder's strike had gone 3,000 years before, and it pinned the horror back down into the dark. And in the breath that bought, Yan Hao's 5 formations snapped shut around it, the black tortoise and the other 4 destinies locking into place, and the barren abyss sealed. The Huangyuan calamity, the thing that had haunted the whole continent for 3,000 years, the reason a sect had been willing to burn 100,000 of its own, ended, with a borrowed sword, thrown by a gardener, who was, at that exact moment, technically, supposed to be somewhere else being harmless. And here's where the legend I'd been accidentally writing my whole life finally finished its first chapter. Because Yang Hu examined the sword that had sealed the abyss, and it was a Taiqing standard-issue longsword, sect-forged, the kind any disciple might carry. And from that single ordinary blade, the whole continent built a god, a hidden true spirit realm master, they decided, a Taiqing Sword Master, a phantom of unimaginable power living secretly somewhere in the sect, who had reached across the world to save them all and then vanished without a word. Every faction on the continent went home in a panic to hunt for their own hidden masters, certain that if Taiqing had won this strong, everyone must. They built the Guanjian platform, the sword-viewing terrace, right out of the stones of that obscene blood altar, a monument to a savior who didn't officially exist. And the sword intent, the residue of the master's power, hummed strongest, curiously, over Huangcheng, over the outer sect, over, if anyone had thought to look, a certain herb garden. Nobody thought to look. Why would they? They were searching for a terrifying immortal. All they'd have found was a gardener telling his apprentice to go buy Lin Bo a new sword, since the old one was, regrettably, stuck at the bottom of the world holding the apocalypse shut. I want to be honest about what that moment did to me, because it's the hinge the whole rest of my life turns on. For 20 years I'd hidden. I'd built a mask so good that an emperor and a grand master and a whole sect of investigators had all looked straight at me and seen nothing. And in one thrown sword, I'd become the most talked about being on the continent, a legend spoken in every tea house, a savior every power on earth was now actively hunting, and not one of them knew my name. I'd achieved the impossible thing. I was the most famous man alive and still completely invisible. The Taiqing Sword Master and Lone Cloud Scroll and Renye the Gardener were three of the most discussed people on the continent, and they were all the same nobody with a hoe, and no one would ever connect them. It should have felt like winning. It mostly felt like standing very still in the eye of a storm I'd made, and knowing the storm was only going to get bigger, and that a legend this size does not stay hidden forever, no matter how good the straw hat. Yan Hao came home from the abyss a hero, and then the world took him from me anyway. His purple light identity got exposed in the aftermath, and Taiqing, ungrateful as sects always are the second the danger passes, handed him an ultimatum, so he chose to leave before they could throw him out. Wen Jun, before he died down there, had freed the restriction on Yan Hao's mystic origin, cut the last string his family had in him, so my bald houseplant walked out of the Taiqing sect a free man for the first time in his life, headed for the eastern wilderness, the loose cultivator frontier, to finally, after all these years of being someone's son, and someone's spy, and someone's weapon, just go make his own name as himself. Sujia saw him off. I didn't, not openly, because the gardener and the spy saying a tearful goodbye would have drawn exactly the wrong eyes. But I watched him go. The kid I'd recruited as a houseplant because he had a suspicious lifespan, and a meat bun, and a con he thought I couldn't see through. The demonic lord's son who confessed to a demonic spy and begged him for absolution. The black tortoise who helped shut the door at the bottom of the world. He'd walked into my garden a liar and walked out of it a good man, and I'd like to say I did that on purpose, but the truth is we did it to each other. Two frauds who accidentally raised each other into something real. Go on, junior brother, I thought, watching the bald head disappear toward the horizon. Go be somebody. You were never a good for nothing. You were just waiting for a garden. And that horizon Yan Hao walked toward is where the whole thing turned. Because a legend attracts challengers. The Taiqing Sword Master was real to the whole continent now. A phantom savior. Bottomless power. And a legend that big does not get to stay quiet. Within weeks there was a man standing on the Guanjian platform screaming for him. A sword sect maniac, Dao realm, a real one, oppressing the whole crowd just by breathing. He'd decided my invisible other self was a coward for hiding, so he called for a death duel. 7 days, northern suburbs. Show up, phantom, or admit you're nothing. He didn't actually want the duel. He wanted the Yuan 2-6 swords back. The forbidden emotion path art. The sword sect's shame. The one Guangzi had used in the blood sacrifice for the whole continent to see. The sword sect wanted it erased and its users dead, and the maniac figured the fastest way to flush out whoever taught the boy was to insult their legend until someone answered. It was clever, in a stupid way. Insult a ghost loud enough, and maybe the ghost forgets it's a ghost. The ghost did not forget. The ghost had a garden to run, and 100 reasons not to answer, and exactly one reason he might, which was a prickly apprentice sitting in a law enforcement cell because of that same sword. So while the whole continent counted down to a duel with a man who didn't exist, I did what I do. I kept my head down, and I started counting my own problems, because they were multiplying faster than the sheep. Guangzi was the first problem, and the worst. My prickly apprentice had used the forbidden Yuan 2-6 swords in front of the whole continent, and now the sword sect wanted every user of it dead. To save his life, the plan was to cripple him, destroy his realm, wreck his spiritual root, leave him immortal, and call it mercy. And even that came with a price. The two sword sect seniors didn't just want the boy. They wanted the name of whoever taught him the art, which was a small problem because the answer was me. Guangzi had lied to protect his teacher, given false information, even carried a memory restriction so he couldn't be read. Loyal to the bone, that kid, even prickly. But if he didn't give the sword sect a name, they'd take him for soul annihilation instead of just crippling him, and I'd sat across enough interrogation tables to know how that ends. So I had a boy in a cell willing to die to keep my secret, and a sect willing to unmake his soul to get it, and no clean way through. I filed it. I hate filing my own apprentices. It felt like leaving a light on in a burning house. Baifan came home in the middle of all this, and he came home famous, not just respected, famous. The disciple who'd shattered the false relic, the hero of the blood sacrifice, and now he had a fan circle, actual crowds of junior disciples who would work themselves to the bone for a chance to glimpse him. I showed him my inner sect garden and watched utility disciples labor like maniacs on the rumor that Baifan might walk by. I could have paid them triple and gotten half the effort. Turns out an idol is worth more than money. I filed that too. Everything's a resource if you're patient enough. Then his uncle showed up, and the family rot finally came out into the light. Xiao Hong, a soul transformation cultivator, one of the 5 destinies, the white tiger, and Baifan's blood uncle, Qin Zhen's own brother, believed dead for decades. He came looking for Yan Hao, who'd taken his help once and ghosted him, which, fair, that's very Yan Hao, and I put him to work first. My poor mad Wang Kang, cultivation shattered into fanatic ruin after the blood sacrifice, unable to even look at Sujia, was still broken, and Xiao Hong's white tiger art was a rejuvenation technique. It could fix a wrecked spiritual root, freeze a body young, so he healed Wang Kang. and the healing worked, mostly. Wang Kang woke up rejuvenated, and remembering nothing. Nobody. Just the happy early days in the garden, the good years, the sunlight and the radishes, and none of the people, none of the trauma. His own divine soul had walled off everything that hurt to keep him alive. And I looked at that, a man who'd forgotten every face that ever failed him and kept only the warmth, and I decided to let it be. He was happy, he was safe. Some cures leave a scar, and some cures leave a blank. And a man who gets to keep only his good days isn't the worst thing I've ever seen come out of that altar. Let him have it. Not everyone has to carry the whole weight. But the real thing Xiao Hong came to say, he said to Bai Fan, and it split my friend in half. He told him the truth, or his version of it, that he was Bai Fan's uncle. That Bai Fan's mother, the woman whose mirror still hovered at my shoulder, had been murdered, killed by Qin Jun and the Empress Ming between them, sacrificed to a political marriage. That Xiao Hong had tried to kill the Empress for it, failed, and fled into a fake death. And now he was back, and he was going to rebel, tear the whole rotten throne down, and he offered it to Bai Fan. The seat, the crown. Take it, nephew. Avenge her. Rule. Bai Fan refused. Flat. He would not believe his father was that man. Couldn't. And I watched my friend hold on to the version of his father he needed to be true, the way we all hold on to the last kind lie about the people who made us. And I didn't say a word, because I didn't know yet which version was real, and because some knots a man has to untie with his own hands or not at all. What chilled me was the part Xiao Hong said quietly, later, when he thought no one was listening. He had a backer. A powerful hidden one. Because you don't overthrow Qin Zhen by wanting to. To take that throne you'd have to subdue both the great families and the Taiqing sect itself, and a fugitive uncle with a grudge can't do that alone. Somebody was standing behind Xiao Hong's rebellion, somebody big enough to make it real, and I didn't know who, and not knowing had started to feel like a cold spot at the center of everything. He left me a summons token before he went, in case I ever picked a side. I put it in the drawer with all the other invitations to wars I didn't want. The drawer was getting full. Guangzhou solved his own cell, or someone solved it for him. There was a prison break at the inner law enforcement hall, a soul transformation escort named Duan Qi dying to cover it, and my apprentice came to me one more time before he vanished, because the stubborn kid wouldn't leave the continent without seeing his master's face once more. I hid him. A Taiqing search party swept the garden, Jiang Wu, the blood sacrifice culprit who hated me, and a Ming family great ascension named Feng Qi, and I tucked Guangzi and his rescuer behind a screen of masked senses that everyone assumed was one of Feng Jun's formations. Jiang Wu tried to arrest me on general principle. Feng Qi stopped him and dropped a piece of news that made my ears prick up. The head of the Meng family, Wu Sheng himself, wanted to see me. Personally. An estranged X-page. That's not nothing. That's a thread with a hook on the end. I sent Guangzi off with a 6th tier sword bamboo root his rescuer pressed on me. A sword sect legacy for comprehending the blade. And I watched the prickly kid go find his father, who was, it turned out, a sect master in his own right, waiting out in the southern desert by the sealed gate of the wild abyss. Father and son, reunited at the edge of the worst place in the world. I didn't know yet how bad that reunion would go. I was just glad, for one clean minute, that the boy who'd chosen me over a cursed sword got to see his father again. But out there in the southern desert, at that sealed gate, something was moving that I should have paid more attention to. A veiled woman with a bell-collared squirrel stood studying the 5-element seal on the wild abyss, and she understood it. Understood it well enough to break it, maybe. And she looked at that door with the patient hunger of someone who knows what's underneath and wants it. And she agreed, for a high price, to back Xiao Hong's rebellion. There was Xiao Hong's mysterious backer. An empress from another world, veiled and smiling, buying a civil war as a down payment on something buried under the desert. I'd meet her properly later. I'd wish I hadn't. Meanwhile, the whole continent was counting down to a duel with a ghost, and the ghost had decided not to show up, and it was making Taiqing look like a sect of frauds. So the day of the duel, I did the one thing that fixed everything without fixing anything. I taught a kid a lesson. Han Yu, my dead teacher's son, my not-quite disciple, was on my mountaintop, being lazy and gifted in equal measure, and I wanted him to understand what the sword actually is. Not the fancy forms, the thing under the forms. So I reached down, and I picked a single blade of wild grass. Not a sword. Grass. And I flicked it. 100 li away, a 1,000-meter mountain range split in half, clean, top to bottom, a wall of stone that had stood since before the dynasty, cut in two by a piece of grass because the man holding it understood that the blade was never the point. Han Yu stopped being lazy. I have never seen a boy get serious that fast. And the residual force of that flick, the sword chi riding off a torn blade of grass, kept going. All the way to the northern suburbs. All the way to the duel. Down there, the sword sect maniac was mid-tirade, trashing Taiqing as cowards and frauds to a crowd that had lost its faith, and the Chen family head had actually disguised himself as the Taiqing Sword Master to save face. A Dao realm pretender the hidden watchers saw through instantly, and then my grass blade arrived. A heaven-splitting dragon of sword chi, out of nowhere, out of a clear sky, and it went for the duel like a verdict. The maniac's own ally, a Dao integration monster called Sword Through Heaven, threw everything he had to block it, and when the dust cleared he was pinned to the city wall, the point of the strike 3 inches from his heart, held there, not killing him, just showing him. And the crowd looked at what had answered from beyond the horizon, felt the true spirit realm weight of it, and roared. There he was, the Taiqing Sword Master, real, watching, choosing when to speak. And Sword Through Heaven, pinned to a wall, pried the weapon loose to look at what had nearly killed him, and found a blade of grass. Nobody in that crowd knew it came from a lazy lesson on a mountaintop 100 li away. Nobody knew the terrifying immortal savior had been trying to make a point to a 12-year-old and just sort of let the leftovers fly. The legend cemented itself across the whole continent that day. Unkillable now, a hidden god who could pin a Dao integration cultivator with a weed. Every faction doubled down on hunting their own hidden masters. And me? I told Han Yu to keep his stance tighter and went home to check on my radishes, and did not mention that I'd accidentally won a continental duel with the sweepings of a gardening lesson. Some victories you just pocket quietly and never explain. It's more restful that way. After that, the threads started braiding into something bigger than a sect, and I want to lay the pieces out the way they landed on me, because they're the shape of everything that comes next. There was a tree, the Luochuan tree, the Luo River tree, a thing from overseas that kept turning up at the edges. I dug a branch of one out of the ground at Baoyue Valley, tipped off by an idiot genius named Yan Wu who could see spiritual qi with his naked eyes and mistook weeds for immortal plants, and the branch traced back to a battle in the North Sea. Then I snuck into the inner library pavilion, 9 floors, 10 million books, and found exactly one torn line about it. Luo River, a divine object from overseas. That's all 3,000 years of the #1 sect had on a tree that a whole hidden faction was building a religion around. Because there was a faction. Huangtian Teachings, the Yellow Heaven sect. They'd appeared on the continent only recently, out of the North Sea, out of overseas, and they worshipped the Luochuan tree as a sacred tree, and they recruited like a pyramid scheme. Join us, keep your old sect, just sell us information. Which, by the way, finally explained how a gardener could wear 6 different hats and never get caught. Multi-affiliation was normal here. Everyone was quietly betraying everyone. I fit right in. I pretended to join them, of course, because the fastest way to learn what a shadow wants is to let it think you're standing in it. And what Huangtian wanted, it turned out, was my Da Chun tree, my money tree. They needed vast heaven and earth treasure to grow their sacred tree, and somewhere in the intelligence they'd bought off the shattered purple light pavilion was a note about a certain 7th-tier camellia in a certain gardener's vault. So they sent an elder, a soul transformation named Shu Tao, to come cut it down. He should not have touched my tree. I let him get close, playing the weakling, and then he raised his lightning spears over my spirit medicine, my lifespan, my beds, and something in me that had been very patient for a very long time just stopped being patient. I caught the spears bare-handed. I slapped him into the dirt, and I reached into his mind and took what was there before I finished him, and his soul restriction shattered as I did. So I only got fragments, but the fragments mattered. Huangtian came from overseas. The Luochuan was their key. And the Dark Moon Fiend King, Yan Hao's father, the man who'd once tried to sacrifice his own son, was still alive and unifying the entire demonic path of the North Sea. Nothing about that story was over. It had just gone quiet, and quiet, in my experience, is what a wave does right before it stands up. The good news, the warm news, came from Elder Yue. My deposed sect master, my radish thief, kept climbing. He'd cultivated the founder's brutal break-and-rebuild technique back up past nascent soul, and then, one new year, he joined our garden dinner as a soul transformation cultivator, and for the first time since I'd known him, the old wreck looked genuinely happy. He gave me a technique that night, a splitting palm, a good honest one that scaled with cultivation and asked nothing special of your talent, the kind of gift you give family. I took in a new orphan around then too, a girl named Xie Yue, whose home a beast had eaten, because apparently my garden has a gravitational pull for children the world threw away. The tables at Spring Festival kept multiplying. I'd built a family so slowly I never caught myself doing it. And then the news that made my stomach drop. The emperor married again. Qin Zhen took a new imperial concubine, a woman calling herself Fen Li, and I knew that face and that weight the second Feng Zheng mentioned it, because Fen Li was the veiled empress from another world, the one backing Xiao Hong's rebellion, the one studying the seal on the wild abyss. She'd walked straight into the palace and married the throne she meant to steal. An empress in her own world, now an imperial concubine in this one, patiently building a faction inside the very family she'd bankrolled a rebellion against, playing both ends of a war she was quietly starting. I stayed out of it, because it was the emperor's bed and the emperor's throne and none of mine. But I left him one cryptic warning on my way past. The only kind I can send without blowing my cover. Lust, I told him, is a knife held over your own head. He didn't listen. They never do. That's why I get so many funerals. I came home from all of it with a headache and a full drawer of other people's wars, and found the Meng family waiting in my pavilion, guards, Feng Qi, and a luxurious, unfamiliar, powerful middle-aged man sitting in my chair like he owned it, which, given my history with his family, he sort of did. The head of the Meng family had come, in person, to see the estranged servant boy he'd sold to a herb garden 20 years ago, and whatever he wanted, it wasn't going to be small. Wu Sheng wanted a book. Of course he did. Everyone wants a book from me eventually. But this one wasn't flattery, it was a weapon. He wanted me to write a story mocking the Zhou royals and preaching that the mandate of heaven had passed to the Meng family. Rebellion propaganda, dressed as fiction, because a throne runs on the will of the people, and my pen moved the will of the people better than any army. He was asking me to help him take the continent. I said no. I said no because of Bai Fan, and I didn't dress it up. Wu Sheng looked at the servant boy his family had thrown away, the one who just refused to make him an emperor, and he severed all ties. Cleanly. Just farm here then. And walked out. And here's the strange thing. I felt lighter. For 20 years I'd carried the Meng debt like a stone. The third miss saved my life, and I'd repaid the family in medicine and silence for 2 decades, and now the head of that family had cut me loose himself. The books were balanced. I owed them nothing. I owed Xuelan everything, but that's a different ledger, and it doesn't close. Because Xuelan was dying. That was the thing under the rebellion, the reason for all of it. Her innate Dao body, the treasure everyone coveted, was killing her. Divine jealousy, they called it. The more she cultivated, the more her own perfect innate chi consumed her from the inside, turning her, slowly, into a puppet. White hair, white eyes, a genius eaten alive by her own gift. And there was exactly one known cure. The founding Azure Fen Emperor, Qin Tian, had been born with the same body, the same curse, and he'd broken it with the royal Dao aura, the collected will of a whole people, and reached true spirit realm, and then vanished. Maybe into the same holy land the Taiqing founder disappeared into. So the Meng rebellion wasn't just greed, it was a family trying to seize a throne's worth of royal Dao aura to save a dying daughter. Evil for a reason. The worst kind. The kind you understand. And the war came. A hard winter, then famine, then the mandate is with Meng books, spreading everywhere, styled like my own work, pirated right down to the voice, and a loose cultivator Meng, leading rebels who took city after city. The Zhou throne leaned on the Xiao family and the Ji family and Taiqing. The Ye family sat on the fence, and the continent settled into a grinding stalemate that fed on ordinary people while immortals played chess above their heads. Sujia confirmed, again, for the record, that the propaganda author wasn't me. It wasn't. For once. Then the crown prince came to my garden, and got himself killed a week later, and nearly took my best friend down with him. Bai Ning. The Empress Ming's son, 200 years in the Eastern Palace waiting for a throne, and he arrived in absurd grandeur to trade a magic painting for a book discussion, and then, quietly, to recruit me as a spy. He wanted eyes on his father, on Fenli, on the concubine from nowhere who was ruling the dynasty into the ground. And here's the twist I didn't expect. Bai Ning wasn't the villain of Bai Fan's story. He carried guilt about Bai Fan's mother. It was an accident, he said, and he wanted to explain it to Bai Fan himself, to make it right. He gave me a pill to pass along. He wasn't an enemy. He was just a tired heir trying to save a rotting house. He was dead within days, killed on the road, his nascent soul shattered, his coachman's body missing. And the suspicion landed, fast and convenient, on Bai Fan. Motive, the throne. He was ranked 13th on the potential dragon list. He had the royal claim, the frame fit like it was tailored. The Xiao family put a fortune on his head and started hunting him across the eastern wilderness. His denials went nowhere. My friend, who wouldn't believe his father was a murderer, was now being hunted as one himself. My life tag told me Bai Fan was alive, off chasing some great opportunity in the wilderness, so I left him to it and went to work on the frame instead. I was fairly sure Xiao Hong was behind the crown prince's death, the rebel uncle with the empress hatred and the hidden backer. But I couldn't scry him, something was blocking me, so I did the loud thing. I threw a warning sword into the Xiao family's secret realm, carved with the Taiqing Sword Master's intent. 6 words to freeze the blood of a great clan. Zhou died and Xiao perished. Back off, my friend. In other words, signed by the one name on the continent nobody dared test. The empress collapsed, her father raged, and the bounty on Bai Fan got very quiet, very fast, because even the Xiao family doesn't want the attention of a god who kills with grass. And then I did the thing I'd been circling for 20 years. I went to save the woman who saved me. I couldn't cure Shui Lan as a gift without exposing everything, but I could do it as a ghost. Her residence at Taiqing was deserted, shabby next to the other true disciples' palaces, the dying genius already half forgotten by a sect that only loves the winning. I slipped in, and I poured my own royal Dao aura into her. The will of the people power I'd been quietly cultivating. The one thing that could balance the lone yin fire eating her alive. She recovered. Partly, that first time. I caught her half-dressed and fled like a startled cat, which is not how the legends usually go, but it's how mine went. And Xuelan, coming back from the edge of death, felt it. A secret protector, someone who'd saved her, more than once, and asked for nothing, and wouldn't show his face. She had no idea it was the starving servant boy she'd told a physician to heal, 20 years ago, paying back the only debt in his life that never balances. I wasn't going to tell her. Some ledgers you keep open on purpose, because closing them would mean the story's over, and I wasn't ready for hers to be. To cure her properly, I needed more royal Dao aura, so I went and made some. 1,000 years poured into my imperial domineering aura, and it evolved into an imperial majesty that drank in the will of the people like sunlight, and I finally understood what the thing actually was. Not magic. Belief. The collected want of millions of ordinary lives, and that's why it balanced an innate Dao body's lonely fire, because the cure for being too perfect and too alone is other people. The whole Meng rebellion, the whole war, was a family reaching for the love of a nation to save one girl from her own gift. I understood it completely. I still wasn't going to help them take a throne to get it. I'd just quietly do what a throne would do, from a garden, for free. On the way I stumbled into a collapsed Huangtian palace hiding another Luochuan tree, and hidden in the dark I heard the truth of the thing they worshipped. Their sacred tree, the real one, the mother tree, didn't just grow medicine. It granted ascension, a road to the immortal realm, and rejuvenation and power. A great ascension cultivator, bumped to Dao integration by a single fruit. They were planting seedlings in the rebel armies like landmines. I killed the two elders arguing over it, cut the tree down, and my system rang up the biggest single haul of my life. Ding! 1,234 years, Luochuan tree. And the moment I left, the unseen leader of Huangtian erased the entire base and buried it, cleaning up behind me before I could even turn around. That's when I knew the thing at the top of Huangtian was in a different weight class than anything I'd met. It moved like a god covering its tracks. I gave Xuelan her second dose, and this time it took all the way. Her black hair came back. The white left her eyes. The dying genius was going to live. And she knew I was there, in the room, and she begged me to come out. Senior, I know you're here. I didn't. I couldn't. But she'd caught something in the royal Dao aura I'd left in her. A glimpse of my memories about her. 20 years of a debt she never knew she was owed. And she'd fallen for the ghost who kept saving her. She knelt and begged to meet her benefactor. And I gave her the only answer I had, in a voice that wasn't mine. There's no connection between us, I told her. I value your talent, that's all. Walk your own path. And if you truly want to meet me one day, then cultivate. Cultivate until immortal ascension, and come find me there. Close your eyes. Feel it. Then I left, before either of us could make it more than it could survive being. It's the cruelest kind thing I've ever done. Give someone a mountain to climb so they have a reason to keep climbing, and put yourself at the top of it, and never once say your name. She had a reason to live now. I made sure of it. I just couldn't be the reason out loud. The Civil War, meanwhile, was still eating the continent, and one day on the Guanjian platform, a man knelt weeping and begged the Sword Master to end it. His family gone, his betrothed gone, the war a machine that only fed on people like him. And the cynics in the crowd laughed. The Sword Master colludes with the powerful, they said. He doesn't care about us. And I stood there in the crowd, a nobody in the mob, listening to them mock the ghost I'd built, and I decided I was tired of the ghost being a coward in the story, so I ended the war. As him. As the Sword Master. At Tongzhou, the last gate before the capital, the rebel puppet general and a pack of Hmong cultivators were about to sack the city. And I arrived, and I beheaded their commander, and I said the only line that mattered. This war ends now. A Meng Dao integration cultivator came at me, and I slapped him out of the sky. And then I reached across the horizon with one hand and grabbed Wu Sheng himself, dragged the head of the Hmong family out of his own secret realm and onto the battlefield, and gave him a choice that wasn't one. Ceasefire. Now. He agreed, bracing to die, secretly begging his ancestors in the Holy Land for a rescue that didn't come. And the war stopped. Just stopped. Because one ghost with a grass blade said so. The people built me a temple at Tongzhou. An actual temple, prayers and incense, faith rolling in as a kind of power I could have used as a shortcut to immortality if I'd wanted to feed on the belief of the desperate. I didn't. There are doors I won't walk through even when they're open, and living off the prayers of people I let suffer is one of them. Ifan's warrant got quietly revoked around the same time, the coachman's confession surfacing conveniently, and Taiqing started angling to bring my framed friend home and make him the new crown prince, since the old one was dead and the throne needed an heir who wasn't a foreign concubine. I let Bifan stay lost in the wilderness a while longer. He'd found something out there worth finding, and the capital was a nest of knives, and a friend who can buy you time to grow is worth more than a friend who drags you home to a crown. I went back to farming. I always go back to farming. And for about 3 years, unbelievably, it almost held. Almost. Then someone tried to hollow out my best friend. My long-range life tag caught Baifan in a fight out in the wilderness, a straw-cloaked Huangtian elder tearing at him, trying to rip the old ancestor's remnant soul right out of his chest to refine into a pill. The whole Crown Prince frame, I finally understood, had been Huangtian's work from the start, a scheme to isolate Baifan and harvest his royal blood. And before I could even move, the cavalry arrived on its own. Yan Hao came screaming out of the sky, my bald houseplant, back from the eastern wilderness, a saint of the Seven Profound Valley now, and with him, a house-sized ink jade Qilin, buffed to the gills, and my old thieving dragon sparrow grown huge. And my divine beast dog picked that Huangtian elder up and thrashed him like a chew toy. The family I'd let leave, coming back at a dead run to save one of their own. I sat in the dark watching my grown-up strays defend each other, and felt something in my chest I don't have a good word for. Pride, maybe. The dangerous kind. I finished the elder myself and took his pockets. A partial treasure map. A remnant soul in a bottle. A former Great Ascension Zhou royal named Ling Tai, whom I recruited on the spot as an anti-Huangtian tracker, because a soul that can smell Luochuan trees is worth more than an army. And an immature Luo River fruit, which told me the mother tree out there was 8th tier, maybe 9th, a horror still growing somewhere across the sea. And that same stretch, the last great thief on the continent, finally walked into my garden and burgled me. Nightblade Phantom, they called him. He stole from the sword sect, from Taiqing, from the Ye family, from everyone, and always got away, and he'd left his mark on my garden, going after my Qingling tree. So I'd set a spiritual net that would catch and teleport any thief straight into my room. And it caught a golden core kid named Wu Jin, 26, who broke into my treasury and found nothing but my collection of strange tales, which is honestly the most humiliating way to fail a heist I can imagine. He was the grand thief. His secret was a magic brush. Mark a spot, phase through any wall into any treasury, break any restriction, teleport the loot out. Once a year, paid in his own blood. And the brush, he told me, was one half of a set. The other half was a lady painting he'd stolen off the dead crown prince. Put them together, and they opened a world. A pocket realm inside the painting, 10 miles wide, with a heavier world intensity than the outside. So heavy, it crushed my perception down to 10 li, which almost never happens to me anymore. The brush could make fake things real, spin chi into temporary constructs. And at the center of that little world stood 3 faceless statues, a youth and a man and an ancient, each carved with a scripture I couldn't read. I didn't understand them yet. I planted spirit medicine, because of course I did, and I installed Wu Jin as caretaker, because the kid had offended every power on the continent and needed a roof and a boss, and I collect exactly that kind of stray. He didn't know he'd just become the servant of the Taiqing Sword Master. He thought he'd been caught by a lucky gardener. The con never stops. I've stopped being surprised by it. 3 quiet years passed after that. The dynasty recovered on paper while the disasters kept coming, Qin Zhen neglecting his throne, Fen Li ruling from the shadows behind it, the Xiao family withdrawn after my warning, and in those 3 years I crossed the line I'd been walking toward my whole life. My tank hit 1 million years of banked lifespan. 1 million. And the system unlocked root cause analysis, a sense that quietly flagged anyone who meant me harm, and paired with my fate reading, it could tell me who wanted me dead and exactly where they were standing. Then I spent, enormously, and forced my way up through true spirit realm, through tribulation transcending, and into the true immortal realm. A true immortal. In a garden. With a bird. And that's where the world showed me its cage. Because the ascension road was closed. Sealed. I'd become a true immortal and found the door to the immortal realm bricked shut, and the system told me plainly what it would take to open it. Reach the immortal king realm, the tier above true immortality, or stay trapped on this continent forever. Something, long ago, for reasons no one alive remembered, had cut this whole world off from the heavens above it. True immortal breakthroughs now required immortal chi one had to drag out of the raw void by hand. The sky over my world had a lid on it, and I was, as far as I could tell, the strongest thing under that lid, and even I couldn't lift it. So I did the only thing left to a man who's outgrown every technique anyone ever handed him. I started writing my own. I built a 5 elements method from nothing to balance the root I was born with, poured 100,000 years into it, and it bloomed into a 5 elements creation art and a divine ability that let me command earth and fire and water and metal and wood wherever my light touched. A thing straight out of my own investiture of the gods. My body became something new, an acquired 5-element engine, and my divine sense spread out until it covered nearly the whole continent like a held breath. I was running out of teachers. I'd started teaching myself. And the questions I was teaching myself to ask, about the sealed sky and the vanished founder, and the 3 faceless statues, and the woman climbing a mountain to find a ghost, were bigger than any garden, and I could feel it, and I kept farming anyway, because the harvest was the only quiet thing I had left. I finished the technique I'd been building, a 5 spirits divine seal art of my own making, brought it to great perfection, and used it to drag every method and my very root past the heaven rank ceiling entirely. An immortal body breaks the old caps. My divine sense spread until it blanketed most of the continent, and I went looking, at last, for the answer to the locked sky. I found the first clue in an abandoned immortal cave, a 7 Profound Valley cultivator's old refuge, empty 10,000 years. He'd left a legacy bead, and the bead told a story that reframed my whole world. The road to the immortal realm had been cut off, 100,000 years ago, deliberately, and this cultivator had come to believe the reason was hidden with the Ice Dragon clan, so he'd gone to investigate, and he had never come back. 10,000 years of silence where a curious immortal used to be. So I followed the Ice Dragons into their sea. Their secret realm was enormous, bigger than any clan had a right to, the kind of place that only exists if someone tribulation tier or higher built it long ago and left. I read their library, tens of millions of books, and found nothing, not one line about the sealed immortal path. Their hidden old ancestor felt me moving through their halls, felt that I outclassed their own Tao emperor, and quietly told the clan not to provoke me. I noted, on my way out, that the seawater itself suppressed a cultivator's divine sense, which was why my whole continent had never managed to sail overseas. The ocean was a wall. Somebody had walled us in on every side, sky and sea both, and the ice dragons who supposedly knew why had a library full of everything except that. It was the loudest silence I'd ever read. Life went on around the mystery, the way it does. A good harvest, a banquet, Elder Yue, a great ascension cultivator now, and beaming, Sujia, risen to inner disciple, Wang Kong happily amnesiac and puttering. I made Wu Jin my permanent aide, sealed a restriction in his divine soul, let him out of the painting to be my caretaker and errand boy, and hid his cultivation under the same chi refining lie I wore myself. The thief who robbed the whole continent now fetched my tea and thought he'd landed the cushiest job of his life. He had, honestly. Working for me is very safe. It's everyone around me who should worry. The Emperor came by, near Great Ascension himself now, still hunting the son he'd driven off, and he came to recruit Fang Zheng for a war. Azure Fen was going to conquer the surrounding dynasties. Outright. And the engine of that conquest was Fen Li's mysteriously swelling power, the concubine from another world feeding the Emperor's army with strength that came from somewhere no one questioned. I got my first apprentices' safe posts away from the front, Lin Bo and the others, quiet executive hall jobs, because I've buried enough of the people I raised, and I wasn't feeding any more of them to a throne's ambition. And I learned the price of my own old warning. The Empress Ming was dead, blamed on Fen Li. The Xiao family attacked in revenge, and then wiped out by a mysterious expert. And Taiqing and the great families had cheerfully divided the corpse of a clan and withdrawn. The board was clearing itself. Somebody was clearing it, and at last I saw the hand doing the clearing. Fen Li, whose real name was Fen Li, met in secret with Xiao Hong the rebel uncle, and Guangji the fallen sword sect master, Guangzi's own father, and struck her bargain. She would be their power, their invincible sword, and in exchange they would guard her while she did her work. And her work was this. She was refining luck itself. Royal Dao Aura, the will of the people, drained out of a whole dynasty by planting Luochuan seeds in the wake of every army she conquered for the emperor. The natural disasters weren't bad fortune. They were her harvest. Every plague and famine was a nation's life force, being siphoned into a woman from another world who thought my continent was the immortal realm and meant to eat it whole. She was the ancestral master. The emperor thought he was summoning to win his war. She personally killed the enemy immortals, grew Azure Fen's fame, and fed on the collected soul of everyone it swallowed. The emperor thought he'd married a weapon. He'd married the mouth that was going to devour his entire world, one conquered province at a time, and he was proud of how well it worked. I watched all of that click into place, the whole terrible machine of it, and I felt the cold settle in deep, because I finally understood the shape of the thing coming. Not a sect war, not a rebellion. The slow, smiling consumption of an entire world by something that had wandered in through the cracks in the sealed sky. And it was sitting in the emperor's bed, wearing a concubine's face, and the emperor was Baifan's father, and Baifan was mine. My own alchemy nearly gave me away next. I'd gotten good enough that a batch accidentally produced an immortal tier pill, and refining it triggered a core formation tribulation that lit up the sky, and every hidden monster on the continent felt it and came sniffing. An ice flood dragon emperor, a Dao realm sword ghost named Gang Lei, a whole crowd of powers who all backed off the instant they sensed each other's hidden weight. I scattered them with a decoy and my void barrier and kept the pill. Then my thief Wu Jin stole it, except what he stole was a fake, a grade 1 nothing dressed up to look priceless, and he traded a genuine grade 6 pill and a stolen god-suppressing talisman for it, and then wept for a week when he ate it in seclusion and discovered he'd been robbed by the man he worked for. I felt a little bad. not enough to give it back. But he'd brought a rumor with him, and the rumor became the key to everything. A mad old devil in the south, killing everyone, eating the souls of Dao integration cultivators. I went and found him, and he turned out to be a true immortal, named Zhen Wu, out of the Holy Land itself, half mad with soul hunger, and we fought, and I won, because my self-made immortal techniques outclass a higher realm cultivated the ordinary starving way. He fled with a promise to finish his important business, and he dropped a scroll behind him, and that scroll rearranged my entire understanding of the world. This world had a name, the Xuanling world. And 100,000 years ago the channel to the immortal realm had been sealed shut, 3 great locks laid down across the world, and the whole realm had been quietly weakening toward a Dharma-ending age ever since, which is why true spirit cultivators had gone from common to legendary. To open the road again, you needed the Across the 3 Lifetimes Sutra, 1 chapter carved at each of the 3 sealed locks. The High Sky, which was the Holy Land, already opened, which is how Zhen Wu got out. The Yuhan Ice Spring, and the Deep Rock Abyss, past, present, future. And here's the part that stopped my breath. The 3 sutras were the 3 scriptures carved on the 3 faceless statues in my painting world. I already had them. I'd been storing the key to the sky in a stolen painting and using the field around it to grow radishes. So Zhen Wu's Holy Land faction was trying to force the immortal path back open. I set Wu Jin to meditating on the present chapter and spun off 2 tribulation tier clones to work the other 2, aiming to find the 3 sealed sites before the Holy Land did. And I finally understood the true shape of the Empress in the Emperor's bed, and the tree Huangtian worshipped, and the ocean that suppressed my senses. They were all fingers of the same buried hand, all pressing on the same sealed sky. Old faces came back through all of it. Dong Kai, one of my early apprentices, survived the Emperor's War and came home to guard Baoyue Valley, and he brought Zhao Xing, the neglected illegitimate grandson of the dead crown prince, a quiet boy whose mother had been a discarded concubine. More strays. The garden's gravity never turns off, and I found the heart of Huangtian at last. My recruited Soul, Ling Tai, tracked their headquarters to a secret realm under a lake at the North Sea's edge, and I raided it, killed everyone, and reached the tree at the center. A Luochuan mother tree, 9th tier, the first true one I'd ever seen, and it held 824 years of current life over a ceiling of 16,000, with 282 fruits hanging off it. I harvested every one, ding, roughly 450,000 years, in a single haul, the biggest number my system had ever shown me. I shrank the tree to take home and plant, because a man who worships nothing can still appreciate a good crop. A hidden source-eater beast came for me as I left, an 8th tier thing, and I trapped it in my azure lotus and read its memory, and got the truth Huangtian had been hiding. They weren't natives. They'd fled their own continent, the Huangtian continent, billions of li across the sea, running from an apocalyptic barren abyss that had killed even their immortals. They were refugees looking for a new world to colonize, and the Luochuan tree was their lifeboat, and my world was the shore they were crawling onto. And the ocean's suppression, the wall that kept my continent penned in, wasn't natural at all. It was the second of the 3 locks, the Yuhan Ice Spring seal, laid across the entire sea. Someone had deliberately sealed my whole world's ocean, 100,000 years ago, and I could not for the life of me figure out why anyone would lock the door on something as good as the immortal path. Unless the immortal path wasn't the good thing everyone assumed. Unless someone had sealed us in, not to keep us down, but to keep something else out. I filed that thought with a very cold hand. It's still filed. It's the thought the whole next part is going to be about. The 7 Profound Valley tore itself apart around then, and I had to reach in and hold it together, because 2 of my strays were inside it. A Grand Elder there wanted Bai Fan and Yan Hao dead, and the Ink Jade Qilin refined into a breakthrough pill, and a loyal faction was defending them on the founder's old will. So I did it the invisible way. I puppeted my recruited soul, Ling Tai, walked him through the valley like a Dao integration savior, and smashed the traitor elders while the whole valley hailed Ling Tai as their rescuer. Bai Fan, not knowing any of it was me, actually knelt and begged the strangers to save his old ancestor. I gave that soul the 7 profound legacy to make it real, pushed him up to true spirit realm so he could genuinely protect the boys, and took off the fleeing traitor Grand Elder, a curious thing. An Ink Jade Qilin scroll, made of the same immortal artifact stuff as my lady painting, carved with a verse I couldn't shake. If you wish to never age, when the world turns upside down, sit on the Qilin. I didn't understand it yet. I understand it now. It's for the very end, and it isn't in this part. Elder Yue, meanwhile, finished his long climb home. My deposed sect master, my radish thief, cultivated the founder's brutal art all the way up and broke through to Dao integration, and the tribulation for it was true spirit grade, savage, exactly the reason nobody had survived that technique in 3,000 years. I saved him at the last with a decoy grade 7 pill, and the old man crossed over, strong enough now to beat anything short of a Dao realm peak. And with him came a sword ghost named Genglei. and Genglei made Elder Yue an offer. He'd back Elder Yue for sect master, if Elder Yue would let him into the Taiqing secret realm, into the founder's own sword puppet. Elder Yue agreed, on one condition, that they honor their dead master's memory. I filed Genglei's strange urgency about that secret realm. It's another one that pays off after this part ends. My whole life lately is seeds I'm watching other people plant. And then the throne cracked. Qin Zhen, the emperor, was assassinated. Not killed, quite. Struck down into a coma, hanging on by a thread, and the Azure Fen throne was suddenly up for grabs, and Taiqing wanted Baifan back home in a hurry to claim it. In the same stretch, an old sword sect true spirit cultivator, Guangji's own master, near death himself, single-handedly held off 15 Dao integration cultivators from Taiqing and the families and the throne all at once, a last stand for the ages, and then mysteriously turned into a fake and died, and the war stopped, and Azure Fen tripled its territory in the confusion, and the Meng family withdrew from the whole world entirely. Zhen Wu recovered enough to hide their secret realm clean off the map. Tangyue City, the imperial capital, was a ruin by then. Corpses, famine, an empire hollowed out from the inside. Because Xiaohong and Guangji were serving the machine now, Fen Li draining the dynasty's luck through the Luochuan seeds she'd planted with every conquest, and the ruin of the capital was just the harvest coming due. But Guangji, at least, had started to doubt. The dying old sword master had warned him with his last breath. Don't believe it. Don't believe the story about fleeing to the immortal realm through the trees. And Guangji, troubled, sent his son to me. Guangzu came carrying a sword blessed with his father's sword intent, and a desperate message for the Taiqing Sword Master. Huangtian is a lie, come quickly, the whole thing is a conspiracy. And then Guangzhu flew off alone to the North Sea to find the truth, with a sentence that turned out to be his epitaph. Master, I hope you're the one who's wrong. I came back from all of it, the valley, and the war, and the ruin, to find the Meng family's secret realm, gone from the world, vanished, and Bai Fan, waiting in my garden, summoned home by his dying father, torn straight down the middle, the way he'd been torn for years, over the one question he'd never let himself answer. Was Qin Zhen his father, the man who gave him 2 of 3 royal heirlooms and called him my child at the last? Or was he the man who'd murdered his mother for a political marriage? He'd come to the one person he trusted to help him decide. He'd come to the gardener. I poured the tea. And I got ready to walk my best friend up to the hardest door of his life, and to watch, helpless in a way even a true immortal can be helpless, as the throne that had haunted him since before we met finally, and fatally, called him home. Bai Fan laid it out over the tea like a man diffusing his own heart. Is a husband who murders the wife who shared his hardships a good man? He asked me. No, I said. Is a father who gives his child 2 of his 3 heirlooms to keep him safe a good father? Yes. And what, he asked, do you do when both of those men are the same man, and he's dying? I didn't have an answer. There isn't one. Family is the one tribulation cultivation never prepared me for, and I told him the only true thing I had, that I didn't believe the palace rumors, that his father's dead brother the crown prince had called it a misunderstanding and pointed at Yang Hu for the truth. Elder Yue, sitting in on the tea, agreed the rumors were too neat to trust, and Bai Fan stood up and turned into a flying tiger and left for the capital to get the answer from his father's own mouth before that mouth closed forever. While he flew, my garden gave me a second emergency. Xie Yue came screaming that Guangzi had collapsed. My prickly apprentice, back from delivering his father's warning, was on the floor with his divine soul and golden core and body all shattered, held together by nothing but the sword intent in the blade his father gave him. Someone had done this to my disciple, and I was going to find out who, but first, I had to keep him breathing. I sent my own spirit out of my body and down into his sea of consciousness, and spent myself rebuilding a soul from fragments, piece by piece, hour by hour, the most delicate work I know. And while I stitched, Guangzi told me the whole conspiracy, everything his father had learned. Guangzhu had met the leader of Huangtian, a veiled woman with a bell-collared squirrel, a being above the Dao realm, and she'd shown him the barren abyss in the southern desert, a horror even true spirit couldn't face, and she'd sold him the story. The Luochuan tree opens a road to the immortal realm, and we must evacuate everyone through it before the thing under the abyss breaks free. So Guangji and Xiaohong had spread the seeds, started the wars, all of it in the name of saving the continent. But the people who returned from the immortal realm had come back wrong. Their sword intent changed, their souls somehow not their own. Possessed. Huangtian was lying. The road didn't lead to heaven. It led to whatever was wearing the returnees' faces. And Guangzhu, too late, had begun to understand he'd been feeding his whole world to it. I flew off the second Guangzi was stable, because his warning and Baifan's flight were pointed at the same place, and I already knew what was waiting there. Tangyue City had become a field of snow and death, because Fen Li had stopped hiding. She hung in the sky above the palace, draining the last of the dynasty's dragon chi, the concentrated life force of 10 billion commoners, pulling it up to break through into the true spirit realm's higher stages, and 20-odd Dao integration cultivators threw themselves at her and died like dropped dumplings. Bai Fan was down there, and she saw him, Qin Zhen's son, and she pointed one finger and sent an ice blade to kill him. Xiao Hong saved him. The rebel uncle, the white tiger, the man who'd wanted to burn the whole throne down, burned himself instead, threw his body across his nephew, and took the blade meant for Bai Fan. He'd hated the emperor, plotted for years, sold his soul to the empress from another world, and at the very end, faced with the boy his murdered love had left behind, he chose the boy. "Tell your father," he said, blood in his mouth. "Tell him I'm sorry." And then he looked toward the imperial tombs where the woman he'd loved for 50 years was buried, and he said her name, "Fen, I've come to find you," and he shattered into ice on the palace floor. The uncle who came to start a war died stopping a blade. People are never one thing. I keep learning it, and it keeps costing someone. Fen Li spread her killing snowfield to finish the rest of them, and Ling Tai, the soul I'd raised to true spirit, arrived to stand against her, and even he wasn't enough. She was climbing past him with every heartbeat of stolen dragon chi. The whole capital was about to become the first course of a meal that would end with the world, and I stood at the edge of it, invisible, a true immortal in a straw hat, and I did the thing I'd spent 20 years swearing I'd never do in the open. I stopped being a gardener, in front of everyone, for as long as it took to save them all. I reached into the sky and took her. A hand of pure sunlight the size of a mountain, out of nowhere, tore her killing snowfield apart, closed around Fen Li and the whole murderous storm she was casting, and pulled her out of the heavens like plucking a weed. The Dao integration cultivators below stopped dying. The snow melted off 10,000 li in a breath, and nobody saw a face, just a hand. The Taiqing Sword Master, they'd say later, again, always. The ghost who reaches across the world. I put her down on a far mountaintop, with her cultivation already gone, stripped clean. An empress from another world who'd walked into mine, thinking it was heaven, and tried to eat it, and I looked at her, and she begged, and I asked her one question, where was Guangji? And she didn't know, so I ended her. No speech. She'd have devoured 10 billion people to climb one more rung. I took the dragon chi back out of her first, a little golden dragon of stolen life cupped in my palm, because it didn't belong to her, and it didn't belong to me either. It belonged to a dying man in a ruined palace, and his son was kneeling beside him. Qin Zhen was almost gone when I got there. The dragon chi drained out of him along with everything else, spending the last of himself just to keep breathing while Bai Fan held his hand. And I stood invisible over the two of them, the emperor and my best friend, the murderer and the good father who were the same man. And I made a decision that wasn't strategy and wasn't debt. It was just for Bai Fan. You'll owe me one more, I thought, and I poured the stolen dragon chi back into his father. It grew into a 100-foot golden dragon, and sank into him, and his face went from gray to living, and for one breath, one single breath, Qin Zhen came back. It wasn't enough. Dragon Chi backlash is fate, not injury, and even a true immortal can't argue a man out of his own ending. He surfaced just long enough to hear my voice, the voice of the ghost who'd been circling his family for 20 years, tell him I'd defy heaven and save him one more time. And he smiled, and he said one word, good, and he died anyway. Whatever was between him and the wife he'd lost and the son he'd wronged, he took it with him, and the only mercy I could give was to catch his divine soul on the way out, seal it quietly, and carry it off to hide in a secret realm across the sea, so that maybe, someday, when I understood more than I did, there might be a way to give him back to Bai Fan, and let them finish the conversation death had interrupted. Bai Fan never knew. He knelt by an empty body and grieved a father he never got to forgive or condemn, and I stood 3 feet away wearing a straw hat, unable to say a single true thing, which is the exact price of the mask I chose, paid in full, at the worst possible moment. That's the cost. I finally know the number. It's standing next to someone you love while they break, holding the one thing that would help, and keeping your mouth shut so the whole careful lie survives one more day. The emperor died, and the dynasty mourned, and Ling Tai, the soul I'd raised, took the throne to hold it together, and an uneasy peace settled over the continent for 3 long years. And that's where I'll leave it, at the edge of the quiet, before everything I've told you turns into everything I haven't. Because the peace is a lie the size of the sky. Fen Li is dead, but the veiled thing that taught her, the real leader of Huangtian, is still out there across the sealed ocean, still growing its mother tree, still planning to walk my whole world through a door that doesn't lead to heaven. Guangji is missing, and his son is waiting for a father who isn't coming back. Shui Lan is climbing, right now, toward the immortal ascension I told her to reach, chasing a ghost who's the servant boy she once saved and will never guess it. Elder Yue is about to make his move on the Chen family and the sect master's seat. There's a founder who vanished into a holy land, an immortal king's sword sleeping in a secret realm no key can open, 3 sealed locks on a weakening world, and a scripture carved on 3 faceless statues that I've been growing radishes next to this whole time. And somewhere at the bottom of it all is the question I can't stop turning over. Who seals a door to heaven? And why? And what does it mean that the only man who ever came back from behind it built this entire sect and then walked back in and never returned? 20-some years ago, they handed me a cracked hoe and a file that said, "Don't expect this one to survive the year." I survived it. I survived all of them. I got the long life, and the garden, and more power than anything under this sealed sky, and a family of strays I keep pretending I didn't choose. And I finally stopped lying to myself about the one thing. I never wanted to be left alone. I wanted to be strong enough that nobody could ever take away the people I love. I'm almost there. Almost. Ask me almost. Again after the next part, when the sky finally cracks open, and I'll tell you what came through.